Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Genre Grinder, the podcast about the weirdest, most unique, and painfully specific film genres. I'm your host, Gabe Powers, and today with me is my friend and host of Tracks of the Dam and former host of Directors Club podcast, Patrick Ripoll.
Hey.
Hi, Patrick. We're coming to you live
from my apartment.
From his apartment. Seeing as this is the first episode, we're going to be working through the kinks, ironing out the concept here.
Yeah, you're going to hear some background noise. That's fine.
And, you know, I don't exactly know what I want to do with this just yet. So we may briefly struggle to even define what's going on here.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the main thrust of this podcast will end up being you struggling to define things. So
yeah,
I think
that's the idea.
I think that's fitting.
So the basic concept here is that we will have a different, usually strange, sometimes mainstream genre, and I will probably have a different guest every episode, but there will be repeat guests over and over. And I'll introduce the concept. We'll talk about it, and then we'll cover 3 to 6 movies. Yeah. Hopefully ones that people haven't already seen.
Yeah. This new discoveries.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
And so Patrick is a connoisseur of slasher movies.
Yes, I am.
But starting there would mean that I was starting with my most popular show.
Yeah, you don't want it. That me and Jim learned that with Directors Club. We saved all of the good directors.
Yeah, you don't do Spielberg and Hitchcock the first time.
No, you got to make them wait for it because you can burn that up real quick.
So we're going to start before that. We're going to do Proto-Slashers.
That's right.
Which is really difficult to define, I figured out.
Yeah, it is because slashers are defined by being influenced primarily by a single film. Proto-slashers are kind of defined as being sort of like those, except they came out before that film.
And they end up being inspired by the same basic films that slashers were inspired by a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And the thing that makes it really difficult is that the time span here goes all the way back to silent movies.
These are largely not films that are like influencing each other the way I feel like a lot of the episodes you are going to end up doing are going to be about movements where one film gets popular and that causes a bunch of copycats, and then it eventually starts taking on its own, rules and conventions and stuff like that. This is just anything that came out before Halloween that kind of feels like a slasher movie, basically.
Right. And I know that some people might argue that you want to start slashers around Black Christmas, or some people might even say Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a slasher movie. I'm counting both of those as proto-slashers. Yeah. I think that they were made before that there was any rules in place, and I think that it was really between Halloween setting up your basic rules and inspirations, and then Friday the 13th trying to recreate that and mostly failing.
Yeah.
But then creating its own.
Failing artistically, but wildly succeeding financially, which is, I think, an important thing that none of these proto-slashers really have. Like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a massive hit, and there are plenty of films that tried to copy it, but most of those films were sort of serial killer movies.
Yes.
And were just took from the nastiness of it. Whereas you can't really plausibly make a slasher movie post-Halloween and claim that you're not somehow inspired by Halloween.
Indeed.
Or post-Friday the 13th, you can't really claim that you're not inspired by Friday the 13th.
Especially if you're dealing with exploitation films, which whole purpose is to be inspired by something
Whereas,
else.
like, Black Christmas, very much a slasher movie, but it feels like it could have just come whole cloth from Bob Clark's head.
Right. And then there, you run into stuff. There's some crossover with the Italian giallo genre.
Yes. Now this is something interesting because I'm not a giallo aficionado, and so many of those films date back way before Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a lot of the films we'll be talking about. And where do you fall on giallo being proto-slashers or not being proto-slashers?
I think that it is an adjacent. It's a cousin. Mm-hmm. But I mostly want to make that its own, maybe couple podcasts. Sure. So I'm not going to really cover giallo. I am going to put something up on the website discussing a couple movies that I think are giallo that count as proto-slashers.
Okay.
So I decided to do that in essay form. I decided that it's another thing about this is I'm going to make the more serious stuff that I write is going to be on the website. And I think that the podcast is going to be more fun.
There is a written component
as
well.
There will be a written component.
Website. What, do you have the URL?
It is just www.genregrinder.com.
So check that out for essays about proto-slashers, for more writing about topics that all these episodes are going to cover.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, and also like there's going to be a little bit of arbitrariness in terms of defining what is and isn't a certain subgenre.
And in fact, if listeners and readers disagree, that's part of the fun.
Yeah.
If you really think Black Christmas is the first slasher movie, and you think it offered something wholly unique
Right.
that these other movies didn't,
Mm-hmm.
that's great, and I'd love to hear why.
Yeah, I've never personally, and this might just be me not being the biggest fan of Black Christmas, I've never heard a very convincing argument that John Carpenter actually took much influence from it.
Yeah.
They're just so different.
And yeah, a lot of it comes with the coincidence that they happen to be both holiday based, and I don't think
No,
that had much to do
absolutely,
with
which
anything.
became such a trope.
Right.
But
which can actually be maybe your and I's next episode. I was thinking is
Oh.
specifically holiday ones,
Yeah,
because that is
absolutely.
sort of a subgenre.
yeah,
And there are thousands of slasher films. Slasher films still exist.
Yeah.
Proto-slashers can't exist by the definition we're doing today.
exactly.
That said, you have certain movies like Tourist Trap, which came after Halloween technically,
Yes.
or maybe even Maniac, that feel like William Lustig's Maniac, that feel like they are dealing with the conventions of proto-slashers.
Yeah.
But they're post-slashers, so there's something else.
That's the thing. There's no plausible deniability there that those people didn't know about Halloween or took some influence from it, which no real other previous proto-slasher can really claim that.
Right.
So, like, there's a movie, I forget, I forget if it's Italian filmmaker or Italian American, but it's called The Killing Hour.
Yes.
And that's sort of, that has a proto-slasher feel.
Yes.
But it came out in like 1982, 1983, something like that. And like, no matter, even if they specifically said, we're not going to do a Friday the 13th Halloween kind of movie, like that was the direction they were stepping away from.
Right.
Excuse me.
Even that early. Well, that's the other thing about slashers, is slasher sprang out very quickly. Proto-slashers, as we're going to discuss here, they were a very slow process.
The idea of a human being with a weapon killing a bunch of other human beings is one that obviously, it's not the most original idea in the world. It's not a high concept. The idea of sequential murders slowly tightening a sort of noose around the neck of like a main protagonist or something, building tension that way. That's Agatha Christie's,
Yeah, Agatha Christie really is, in a way, kind of ground zero for a lot of this.
Yeah. So the idea that these sort of ideas were floating around, they didn't actually, it's just, they never all clicked into place in a way that became codified. Whereas I personally could, or no one can really make a slasher movie now and not think about it as a movement that sprang out of Halloween.
Yeah.
I can't go back to that naive time. The genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah.
As much as I would love to like set my sights on making a weird scuzzy like 70s exploitation film like some of the ones we're going to be talking about, you just can't do it now.
No. Yeah. So
we have a big list.
Yeah, I might actually in future one, depending on who I'm working with and how much those people want to contribute, I would maybe do fewer movies. Patrick and I each picked 3.
Yeah.
I made a big list on Letterboxd, which I'll have a link for both on the website and wherever I end up putting this.
Do you want to at least name drop the big list, or do you just want people to sort of look it up?
It's under my Letterboxd. Do you think I should read the whole thing?
I think we could say a sentence or two about what makes them proto-slashers. Like The Lodger, A Story of the London Fog, the classic Alfred Hitchcock movie, is inspired by Jack the Ripper. It's about someone who thinks that someone who is lodging in a guest room might be a serial killer. And in the way that a lot of early serial killer movies kind of take the form of slashers where you're waiting for the next murder to happen, that is the way The Lodger is structured. Cat and the Canary is a different subgenre that maybe you'd want to tackle at some point.
And actually I have a little bit of a write-up on Cat and Canary that I did, because I think it and Old Dark House there's this whole concept of you have to stay in the house for a certain amount of time to get. It's a Scooby-Doo concept.
Yes, it's travelers. Their transportation breaks down, or there's a terrible storm, and their only choice is to hole up in the most dangerous, creepy-looking mansion you've ever seen in your life.
And usually people there's some sort of, either they're travelers or there's this surprising number of these where there is some sort of will.
Yeah.
And you have to stay in the house for the will, and then people are trying to fuck with each other.
Sure.
To make
the classic Fat Boys, Are You Ready for Freddy stipulation.
Yes. Yeah, actually, that's great.
That's finally the slasher movie getting back to its old dark house roots, is the music video for Are You Ready for Freddy. I've never seen 13 Women from 1932.
I've not seen 13 Women.
But you listed it as a potential proto-slasher.
Yeah, and a lot of these I based off of researching the plot lines and what other people have said. But a lot of them I have seen. Like The Leopard Man is... Yeah. The Leopard Man is almost disturbing in how closely it mirrors a lot of actual slashers, and not even just proto-slashers.
Some of these proto-slashers were later, the lesser-known proto-slashers were ripped off for little scenes and sequences were ripped off when slashers proper came into play. Like I was thinking Bay of Blood, the way a lot of those murders were ripped off in Friday the 13th movies. The Leopard Man was ripped off in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 with the claws going through the door and one of the most horrifying deaths ever. But again, there's sequential murders. There's the question of who did it. There's the question of, are they going to be caught? When are they going to strike again?
And also the killer in The Leopard Man goes back to a Gialli thing where someone's actually slashers do this too, where someone will have a emotional breakthrough that will make them become a killer. Yeah. Whether that's a trauma or remembering a past event or witnessing something traumatic.
It's always great to watch 40s movies and then a psychologist pops up and starts saying things that even I, like someone who barely graduated high school, is like, that's not how the mind works at all. But it was the 40s. What did they know?
Yeah. And most people will know that from Psycho, which is sort of already a joke, but was 20 years after the fact. Yeah. And they knew a lot more about it.
But this comes out in the first movie I want to talk about in depth, 1945, Hangover Square. It's a film by John Brom. It's one of, I believe he only made 3 horror thrillers for Fox. He also did a remake of The Lodger with Laird Krieger, who is the lead of this film. And he did a film called The Undying Monster, which is a really strange, dopey, very silly sort of old dark house kind of a movie. But it's beautifully shot. And John Brom has a really good eye, especially for this. This is what you would call a horror noir, where it sort of takes what would later become horror tropes and puts them in a sort of noir mystery. It's about an artist who is sort of struggling to write this great concerto that will, elevate his reputation and sort of make him an international star. It has all the makings of a great piece of music, but he's been having these spells where he wakes up and he doesn't know where he's been and he thinks he might have murdered someone. And we, the audience, you might think this is the central mystery of the film, but we, the audience, know right away this is in fact the case. The very first murder happens in the very first scene in the movie, and we very distinctly see his face committing it.
Yes.
So it is not, and this is something that is true of The Lodger as well. It is less about the mystery, and it's more about the psychology of the characters and how this makes them feel. Something that John Brahms, I think, is very interested in.
The police tell strange tales about this man, who at one moment is a tender lover, and in the next moment the fiendish slave of his own desire to kill.
And this has been going on all the time, I suppose.
Now, look here, my dear Bone.
And
it's going to be all right in a day or two.
But at the piano, she said...
No, my dear fellow, don't get upset.
She whispered to me, she promised, you could have me, she said.
Never has such a gripping story been so realistically enacted. Breathtaking indeed are the performances of Laird Krieger, Linda Dornell, George Sanders, Glenn Langan, Faye Marlowe, and others.
Why don't you go away and leave me alone?
Well, George, you can't let me down now. Please.
This goes on and on. These songs mean nothing to me. What do I get out of them?
You could get me.
So Laird Krieger is really good at that.
Yeah, he's and apparently they specifically wanted to make this movie because the Lodger remake was such a big hit, and it was hard to convince the studio to use him again because I'm guessing in the Lodger he was not this sort of sad romantic lead,
right? Yes, Laird Krieger is a fat man, and a
big tall fat man.
He played heavies in a lot of films. I think in what is that film about the hitman who's on the run? This Gun for Hire. He's a heavy in that. Great film noir. And there is a really interesting metafictional story, which is Hangover Square is the story of this great high-minded artist writing this classical music. He's sort of gets quote unquote friend zoned by this woman that he is close with. And there's a psychologist who suggests that in order to deal with these kind of spells, he should unwind and not get so wrapped up in his work. So he visits a pub where they're doing very popular, very low art kind of song and dance numbers. And he gets sort of seduced into that world of like writing these sort of disposable pop songs, partially because he's being manipulated by this beautiful singer. I can't remember the actor's name at the moment, but and it's one of those movies about sort of like the frustrated, sort of very sensitive artist whose work is brilliant but misunderstood, and he sort of has to debase himself writing this popular music in order to get people to pay attention to him. And that's really funny. It's also funny that tying into this sort of like, this is the kind, it's based off a novel, and you get the feeling that this is an artist telling the stories, an artist working through like the struggle between art and commerce. And it's a discordant sound is what triggers him to go into these sort of fugue states where he murders someone. So there are like 2 or 3 murder sequences in the film.
Yeah.
Where he'll hear a wrong chord or he'll an awful sound or something like that, and it will cause him to go out and commit this murder. So that is, in that way, it's a proto-slasher because it is this sequential sequence of murders, and you're wondering. But
the murders always have a purpose. They're not random murders.
It's true.
Though I wasn't actually clear. The first murder is that one related to, do we think that guy owed him money? I was trying to figure that out.
That one I couldn't figure out.
Okay.
I think that one's a weird red herring because you see his face at the very beginning scene, and he literally turns himself into the cops and says, you know what? I just have to be honest. I've been having these spells, and I just heard about this guy who was murdered. And when I came out of my spell, I had this knife. I think I killed him.
It really feels like something that would happen much later in the movie.
Exactly.
It's very strange to put
exactly.
At the very beginning.
All intents and purposes, it is a programmer from 1945. So it is like 70 something minutes. It is like very quickly paced.
That murder in particular is very stylish. It has a point of view shot, which is popular in slashers and gialli. Mm-hmm. And the way the camera, I mean, it's Hitchcockian, but it's Psycho Hitchcock.
It's true.
It's pre most murder.
Well, another thing that's Hitchcockian about this film is Bernard Herrmann's score, which is, I love Laird Krieger in this, and I think it's just a good movie all around, but Bernard Herrmann's score is on another level, like almost as iconic as his score for Psycho or for Vertigo or many of the films he did with Hitchcock, especially this great concerto that he's working on. He basically gets caught and found out that he is the murderer on the night of him performing this great concerto. And he gets cornered by the police, and he sets a fire in the opera house. And this is the devastating climax of the film. Everyone flees out of the opera house as it goes down in flames, and the camera is whipping around him as he's playing this like devastating number on the piano.
It's such a self-contained and great, well done sequence that it almost feels like a really expensive episode of The Twilight Zone.
Little bit.
Like there's you do need the backstory for it to really work, but
and like I said, John Bram has a really good eye. He makes really striking looking movies, and this whole movie looks really good. There's a sequence where he strangles the woman who sort of seduced him into writing this popular music, and then he drags her body out to a Guy Fawkes bonfire. That is like absolutely incredible.
It's nightmarish. It doesn't make sense,
and I feel like there is a little bit maybe of Hitchcock influence in terms of like not trying to hide camera movement and trying to like get, especially during that final sequence where he's performing this piece of music, like the camera is flying around this orchestra. Like you would think it was a Brian De Palma movie. Like you would think it was post Hitchcock. It's so kinetic.
Well, and it actually works really well because I'm watching the movie the first time and you had suggested it to me, and I was thinking the first half is pretty standard.
Yeah.
Kind of boilerplate stuff, and I was a little bit curious as to why you suggest it, but this kind of stuff starts happening and it's so over the top compared to what comes earlier becomes better.
Yeah.
Because that's baseline.
So that is one way it feels like. So it is a noir film. It is sort of about the melodrama of this man's plight and the mystery and him sort of getting trapped in his situation the way noirs are. But the thing that I think I associate with slasher movies, mostly just because of films like Halloween and, you know, post-Halloween works by like Brian De Palma and stuff, is they can be very showy, or like Nightmare on Elm Street films. They're very extravagantly stylish in a lot of ways. And because the art, there's such low art and no one's paying attention that it's just sort of an excuse for people to do crazy things with the camera.
Yep.
And that in that way that this is a great horror film in the Bernard Herrmann score and the way Bernard Herrmann's score ties into slasher movie like Bernard Herrmann's work ties into slasher movie history. That way it feels like part of the pantheon of slasher films. And then there's also a really interesting metafictional angle, which is that Laird Krieger himself was a fat man who wanted to be a romantic lead. And this, like you said, this was a film that the studio kind of was on the fence about wanting to make. Laird Krieger went on a crazy crash diet. He lost, I think, somewhere around 50 pounds before the shooting of this film. He's still fat in this movie.
Yeah.
But like shortly after this movie came out, he died of health issues related to his weight loss. So there is this sort of mirroring of his career and the artist in the film, how they trying to achieve these great heights and they absolutely destroy themselves for it. And the first time I saw this was at a Noir City Film Festival, and they told this whole story about Laird Krieger's career. Basically, Vincent Price went on to have the career that Laird Krieger was set up to have.
That's okay.
They're very similar in they're both queer men as well. And in that way, that's sort of adds interesting shades to a lot of different Laird Krieger performances, because he always is this outsider who's sort of distant and can't be in touch with the rest of the people around him. But like that story of Laird Krieger, how his life and his career ended and how it mirrors Hangover Square makes that final sequence even more just outstanding.
I didn't realize he was queer.
Yeah.
That's an accidental continuity here in some of the movies we're going to be talking about.
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
that's interesting because all the Hitchcockiisms, obviously they remade The Lodger. They were aiming for Hitchcock.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff, Herman hadn't worked with Hitchcock yet. The guy who wrote the play, he eventually went on to write Rope.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that connection.
Hamilton. He wrote Rope, and Hitchcock made that after Hangover Square. So these are all Hitchcock
and that is probably
things that
Hitchcock's queerest.
Yes, that's definitely Hitchcock's
the Leopold and Loeb inspired Rope.
And then there's the weird the pre-acceptable queerness of the character. Yeah. A lot of Norman Bates became a sort of baseline for a lot of proto-slashers.
And I mean, and you know, outside of the horror genre, outside of this strain of film, in general, in media and culture, there was this sort of post-war there was the taciturn tough guy who was the hero, and the man who showed his emotions and was queer coded was the villain.
Yes.
You know, you go to Peter Lorre in The Maltese Falcon. It's not just, you know, horror films, but definitely this carries on through horror films well past, well past the 40s, well past film noir. These kind of queer-coded villains become honestly a problem.
Yeah.
A real fucking problem, especially once they become transcoded.
Right. And which it becomes a very popular thing in slasher movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes again to Psycho. I think that it goes to misunderstanding how to recreate Psycho.
Yeah.
I don't think Psycho set out to be negative in its queer coding of the character. I think that it was really supposed to be the shock of a young man being his mother, not a young man being a woman.
Right.
But I might be wrong there. I mean, I'm sure Hitchcock and Stefano and I'm sure they weren't super open-minded when it came to that kind of thing, but I don't think it was what they were going for necessarily.
I mean, and even among trans identity the understanding of trans identity has continued to grow all through the 20th century and into the 21st century, even among the communities of trans people. So these are the kind of things that can be hard to judge previous films by today's standards. Sometimes it's really easy when it's something like Terror Train or something. And it's just a screaming queen in drag, going I'm a woman. Blah! All right, whatever. Yeah. This sucks. But anyway, Hangover Square, it's in a lot of ways, it's not really a proto-slasher. In a lot of ways, it's more film noir than it is horror. But I think in a lot of key ways, it feels like a powerful part of the continuity of the slasher film.
Well, and I think the character is it is the visuals of the killing sequences, even though there is the way that he uses a very specific weapon to kill people.
That's true. The rope with the knot tied in.
And there's the fetishization of the killer's weapon became a big deal, especially post Chainsaw Massacre, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so there's that, but I think that the character, if he actually would have been able to just be allowed to be a fat guy, and if they remade this film, he would just be allowed to be a fat guy, because there's a certain I don't know if William Lustig's Maniac has any attachment to this, but the idea of this artist being
I forgot about that,
being kind
Maniac.
The difference being that Maniac is such a weirdly narcissistic movie, that he is this artist who's tortured by his problem with women and his mother, but he also gets to be best friends with a super sexy woman. Whereas Hangover Square has this more noir. It's misogynistic in a way that noir movies are, not in the way that slasher movies are.
Right.
It's misogynistic in that way that women are going to ruin your life.
Right. You're going to chase after these beautiful women, and they are only going to give you just enough to
and
let
you're
you
just
hang yourself.
And then you're justified in killing them.
Yeah, sure.
And that is actually something really shocking, looking at the scene where he's getting rid of her body. Part of it is the chaos of what's going on, but there's also a big component of, oh my God, he might get caught.
Yeah.
When looking back through it, and, I'm watching this movie. If you told this story today, that woman would be the protagonist. The pop star trying to get her big break would be the protagonist. And so this other woman who's supposed to be it was even described in Wikipedia as his girlfriend, the other woman.
Oh, really?
Who I honestly couldn't tell the two actresses apart.
Well, there was the scene where the police psychologist or whoever he is, George Sanders, who's absolutely incredible.
Yes.
Is sort of like, I'll walk you home. And he sort of flirts with her, and she's very open to his flirtation.
Yes.
That, to me, said they're not dating.
Yeah.
Generally.
So, but there's this other woman
because he has a professional relationship with her father, and I
Yeah.
think that she thinks of him as a friend.
And that's why I thought that was a little weird that they described her as. Anyway, he has this relationship with this other woman, and there's this whole scene where this other woman, who is coded as super virginal and super proper, instead of saying you shouldn't be interested in this other woman because she might be using you, she specifically says you shouldn't be writing music for her because it's lesser music and beneath you.
Yeah.
And I feel that's something that I feel like if this movie was made in modern era, it would be the complete opposite. That person would be the villain.
Or it would be, or this movie would be made in 1982, and it would be a Brian De Palma movie.
Yes,
where it's like where the whole fulcrum of the movie is about how lesser movies are actually the greatest movies. Yes. How like base exploitation is actually greater than Citizen Kane or whatever. And then also there would just be some insane like shower dream sequence too.
Yeah, there's a little bit of something that would show up in slashers where a popular girl will use her femininity to lure an unpopular guy into some sort of trap that humiliates him and turns him into a killer later. But I don't really get that mostly from this. This is really someone using someone.
Also, there is a touch of, and this is something I associate not with post-Halloween slashers, but maybe with post-Wes Craven Scream slashers. There's the idea of the voyeuristic set piece and him dragging her body up in a huge festival parade where everyone is like bringing up all of these stuffed Guy Fawkes bodies to be burned on this bonfire. He has an actual dead body and everyone is just like laughing and having a grand old time because they think he's just this weird goof. And he crawls up as they're lighting the fire and he almost gets burned himself, depositing her body at the very top so no one will see it. And they're all just like, boy, you're really crazy. You know, trying to burn that Guy Fawkes body. Like, I don't know why they thought that was a stuffed. Like, it doesn't.
Well, I didn't realize that I assume that's a real thing where they would have burned. I mean, because this is not supposed to be taking place in the 40s. It's supposed to be taking place a little bit before it. Actually.
Possibly. Yeah. Because there's gaslight and stuff like that.
So I guess that was an actual thing where you'd make giant Guy Fawkes bonfires.
Yeah, I can only accept it as fact.
I suppose maybe I could have researched it. Maybe that's what I'll do after I iron out these kinks we're talking about.
Yeah, there we go.
Is I'll start doing more research.
Yeah. Okay, the next film, the same way that Hangover Square has 1 foot in noir and 1 foot in horror, I think Spiral Staircase, it has 2 feet in horror, but 2 very different kinds of horror. One that is very much an older tradition going back to like 19th century literature, and then one that is a proto-slasher looking forward to towards the tail end of the 20th century.
The Spiral Staircase, starring Dorothy McGuire, George Brent, and Ethel Barrymore. With Kent Smith, Rhonda Fleming, Gordon Oliver, Elsa Lanchester, Sarah Allgood, and Reese Williams. A flawless cast acting a story of flawless fascination, giving full range to the artistry of Dorothy McGuire in a role so unusual, so compelling, so fraught with emotional power, no other actress would dare play it. An inspiring portrayal, destined to become her most distinguished screen triumph. The Spiral Staircase is an absorbing, dramatic experience of such gripping conflict, artful suspense, and daring realism as to make it a screen achievement unlike anything you've ever seen.
The Spiral Staircase it opens insanely for a movie from 1946, which is... and again, like calling back Brian De Palma, like it's taking place above this movie house. I forget what movie is even playing.
It's The Kiss.
Okay, that's right.
I believe it's The Kiss.
That's right, because this is also a period piece.
Yeah.
So the camera sort of pans up, and we see that this woman has an apartment above this movie house. And then they do this thing that is a shot that I've seen in 100 slasher movies, but this has to be the first instance of it, which is her closet is open, and then it sort of crash zooms into 2 like really hateful eyes that are just like sitting in the back of the closet.
Yep.
And then there's this very strange effect. This is a film I watched like a month and a half ago, so my memory is not quite as sharp. But
there's this instance of multiple voyeurisms.
Yeah.
Where people are watching this movie about this kiss.
Oh, sure, which was very lurid.
But so there's that aspect, but then there's also children peeking through the curtain at the people watching the movie of the kiss. And then meanwhile upstairs, the woman who I think is supposed to be she's supposed to be the projectionist, I think.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure on that. It's a good thing to correct me on.
They definitely say who she is in the following scene, but I just can't recall.
And then someone watching her. So the person whose job it is to watch the thing that makes the movie go, to make the people watch it, the children watch. Yeah, it's a whole layer of.
So yeah, so again, like Brian De Palma makes movies that are so extreme, it's easy to like over reference him, I feel, but like this definitely fits.
Yeah,
it's and
well, actually, I should say, while you're saying that, and we haven't even first thing, and I'm trying to go fast, but Argento actually takes two of his most famous shots from that exact scene. One being the crash into the closet you were just talking about. There's a big one of those in Deep Red.
That's right. Yes.
And then also the woman gets killed as she's putting a shirt over her head. And she doesn't get cut like in Tenebrae, where the woman's putting a shirt on, gets slashed, the shirt gets cut, and then she gets cut. She gets strangled with her arms still over her head. Mm. So I feel like Argento took both those ideas. I mean, and I know for a fact that he was in that, him and Bava, and like the whole. This was a very important movie to a lot of Italian filmmakers.
So yeah, we don't necessarily need to spend so much time on every individual film, but I do want to say the Spiral Staircase. We've talked about sort of its influence going forward on the slasher genre, but it also, I think, for the most part, and this is honestly like the only thing that kind of deflates the movie a little bit for me because it deflates the slasher angle. It also has a sort of Hawthorne-esque sort of just like generations of unhappy people in this like house that kind of has a curse because just everyone has this like bad past that is tied into like the patriarch and matriarch, and they all have like resent each other, and they're all just kind of hateful. Yeah, and it's stuck in this old dark house during a storm.
It's I don't know. It's another one of those movies. Is it a melodrama? Is it a horror movie?
Exactly.
Is it a film noir?
There's so much of that material there. So the interesting thing about Spiral Staircase is it has a single killer who is sort of the implication, once you find out who it is, it doesn't actually make sense. But the implication early on is that he is this outsider who has snuck into the house following this mute woman during an absolutely astounding sequence where she drops her key in a puddle and has to go reaching for it. And you just sort of see the camera sweep around her as this figure, the shadowy figure, is stalking her. And it's like, it's such a good suspense sequence. And he gets inside the house, and there's a lot of those John Carpenter-esque shots where they're sort of big wide shots that suggest a lot of different hiding places of where this person who's clearly watching these characters could be. The same way that all through Halloween, like you just see through windows and down hallways and stuff, and you're waiting for Michael Myers to pop out of one of them. The thing is, that is sort of the first 15 minutes or so, and then very quickly it gets turned in. It sort of goes down the melodrama, which isn't bad, but it's certainly not scary.
I made myself a note here saying it is the perfect long-necked, doe-eyed woman slinking through old dark hallways movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes you get two long-necked, doe-eyed women slinking together. It also, I think, it fits in the proto-slasher thing because specifically she is deaf. No, she's not deaf. She's mute.
Right.
A handicapped woman being trapped. There's the wait until dark angle where there's a blind woman trapped. And then there's always a rear window.
Yeah.
Which has some elements of slasher, proto-slasher. And there's
one of my favorite slasher movies of like the past 5 years is Hush, Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, I haven't seen Hush, so tell me about Hush.
It's a deaf woman who has a sort of house in the middle of nowhere, and there's a guy stalking her who he's about to just kill her right away at the beginning of the movie, and then he realizes that she's deaf, and he's like, "Oh, actually, I'm going to fuck with her."
Okay, yeah.
That's a very good sort of wait until dark rip off.
Well, and I do feel like this is something that really is a proto-slasher more than a slasher, because it's not as much fun. Slasher movies want a body count.
Yeah.
Proto-slashers, you want the fear of the kill and all that stuff. You don't necessarily need the body count, so you don't need to establish 14 teenagers to kill you. You can have a killer follow one person around for a long period of time.
Yeah, so while a lot of this is sort of melodrama, it does have a lot of not just formal but narrative sort of devices that would show up in a lot of slasher movies. And if you say that, like Bava and Argento were specifically inspired by it, then there's no question.
There's no question.
A very important proto-slasher movie. I'm not quite as in love with it as Hangover Square, so I can't gush on it as long.
It's kind of almost the opposite of Hangover Square, where it starts strongest.
Yeah.
The ending, okay, it's another thing, is that the killer's reason of trying to weed out imperfect people has a sort of slasher kind of weird. Why would this killer thing? Yeah, it's got a little bit of that going on. The killers in slasher movies have really bizarre needs.
Yeah, or like it makes me think of a movie like Pieces or something.
Yes,
where it's like, like that is not how trauma works.
No.
Like that is so specific.
Yeah. So,
and like you said, this is the quintessential long-necked sort of waif going through dark hallways. Like the lighting in this movie is incredible, especially every time they go down to the basement. They do the great old film effect where someone's holding a candle and there's very clearly just a spotlight on them.
Yeah.
The phony candlelight in all of those sequences is absolutely gorgeous and incredible.
Yep.
And very theatrical and awesome. House of Wax from 1953 is just a killer running around a city killing people and trying to get caught, and it's a remake of a 30s film that has the same plot that we didn't include on here because that one is more of that's a Michael Curtiz film, and it's a little more of the I don't know why. I guess Dr. X and the Mystery of the Wax Museum could fit here as well.
I could add it later.
But at any rate, those two films are they have a weird structure where there's like a reporter. The films from the 30s are kind of half comedies. Whereas this film is a little more it's the 50s, so things are a little less serious. We've already reached the point where like Frankenstein and the Wolfman are punching each other. Yeah. So, or where Abbott and Costello are putting pies in their faces. Forget, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. So like we've already reached the point where this is in 3D and there's parts where someone's paddleballing into your face and it's just very goofy. But it's just so much fun. And
it's really well shot. And it was another one that inspired a lot of Italian movies.
Great. I saw it in 3D. Great 3D for a movie directed by a guy with one eye.
Oh, well, there you go.
Andre de Toth, one of our famous Hollywood eye-patched directors.
One of the couple, actually.
Yeah. That was a real thing. I don't know anything about Man in the Attic.
I have not seen Man in the Attic. I have not seen The Daughter of Dr. Jekyll, and I had not heard of The Daughter of Dr. Jekyll, and I only added it after the fact because I had done a write-up on Hands of the Ripper, which we'll get to in a minute, but is about the daughter of Jack the Ripper having a traumatic event bring about memories of being the daughter. So I just thought that was very interesting that such a movie existed.
And then 1958, Screaming Mimi, also have no idea what this is.
The Screaming Mimi is based on a very popular book that Dario Argento basically ripped off for Bird with the Crystal Plumage. So it sets up a lot of traumatic tropes in killer guy movies. This is not a particularly great movie. It's low, cheap stuff, but it's interesting from that. And if you are a fan of giallo movies in particular, it's worth seeing.
Horrors of the Black Museum, 1959.
It's a B version of that kind of House of Wax thing.
The late 50s are such a weird time for horror films because it was the time when most of that kind of money was the audiences were going to see giant monsters instead of horror, like actual horror. So 50s is such a strange decade for films that you would call horror.
You do get some really subversive things creeping through here and there, but for the most part, that Jack the Ripper that's next up, I have not seen. It just got released on Blu-ray for the first time from, I believe, Severin. So I'm planning on seeing it.
Oh, I should say Spiral Staircase and Hangover Square, I think both have Kino Lorber releases.
Yes.
And those are great.
The Spiral Staircase one is relatively new and it was very nice.
Mm-hmm. And Hangover Square is very good as well and has a special feature about the life of Laird Krieger.
Oh, great.
Peeping Tom from 1960. This is one of those films that I own and is like fundamental horror that I just like held off because I want it to exist for me to see for a first time later. So but like Peeping Tom is clearly along with Psycho in
Peeping Tom and Psycho are like a turning point in this whole thing. I think 1960 in general is a turning point in horror movies. It's something I might actually want to cover.
It's not just a turning point in horror movies. It's a turning point in all movies because that's basically 1959, 1960 is basically when the Hays Code just got told to fuck itself with auto premature movies like Anatomy of a Murder and Advised Consent and The Children's Hour. There's all these films that were breaking all kinds of rules.
And then in France you have Eyes Without a Face. In Italy you have Black Sabbath. Mm-hmm. in Korea, you have The Housemaid.
It feels like the beginning of the 60s, most of the world, you start seeing a lot of taboos broken on film. And then the end of the 60s is where that sort of picks up in America as well.
Yeah.
But this is sort of the first gas of that. Peeping Tom and Psycho, Psycho, I don't think we need to talk about.
No, everybody's
if
seen
you're the
Psycho.
kind of person who listens to a podcast called Genre Grinder, you probably understand Psycho and its influence on horror films.
And we're probably going to reference it about 15 more times.
Yeah.
Just in the next hour.
Peeping Tom, probably the same, even though I haven't seen it personally.
Well, Peeping Tom, the big thing about Peeping Tom, other than point of view and the killer's obsessions, is the pathology of the killer is a big deal. And that kind of pathology would change in part because Michael Myers became popular, and Michael Myers doesn't actually really have a pathology.
Right. He's just the shape.
And that kind of Mrs. Voorhees has a driving factor to why she's killing people, but Jason Voorhees really doesn't. There's a sort of like he's getting revenge, but after a certain point, he's just a monster. And even you go as far as Freddy Krueger, who has much more personality, he's still just sort of killing because he wants to kill. I mean, there's his backstory there, but I think that Peeping Tom's pathology of its killer and Psychos is a particularly proto-slasher element.
So speaking of Psycho, Anatomy of a Psycho from 1961, is this a movie that tried to ride the wave of Psycho success?
Yes, and
by putting that in the title.
Yeah, basically, and it's sort of like it's more like a body snatcher kind of thing. Not Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but like the old.
The Robert Wise film.
It feels older than it is. When I haven't seen it for a very long time. It's one of those movies that's in the public domain, so I remember seeing it.
It's on YouTube, probably.
Probably.
Now, how many of the... Okay, so we do actually have a fair amount of Herschel Gordon-Lewis on this list.
Yeah, I tried to really break down. Herschel Gordon-Lewis is very important to all these because he made the first splatter movies.
Right.
Splatter movies aren't necessarily slasher
We are
movies.
talking about Blood Feast from 1963, obviously.
And so Blood Feast has the killer angle and the stalking and the goal that the killer has.
The cops chasing after the
killer.
killer.
Cops chasing the killer.
The woman who's closer to the killer than she realizes.
The gratuitous bikinis and almost nude shots. And there was an actual nude shots because that would have got, I guess.
You could have one or the other.
One or the other. Or violent. Or nudity.
Or you could rip out a model's tongue.
It's actually an interesting thing that it would be, and again for another podcast, but the other movies that Lewis was making around these times that weren't gory, the Roughies, are far more disturbing.
Sure.
Because it's people being strangling and beating up women.
Yeah.
Instead of like cutting them and removing a cow tongue.
In order to make an Egyptian feast that would bring about the god of...
There's a silliness to the gore movies that helps you separate yourself from it.
Dementia 13 is such an interesting movie. It's a Francis Ford Coppola, also several other people, right? It's a typical sort of Corman joint.
It's a Roger Corman joint where everybody was given a chance to do something.
Yeah. But
as long as it didn't cost too much money.
It's got the sort of eerie, dreamlike nature of a lot of proto-slasher movies, especially like Euro films it's got a murderer, it's got the family squabbling on the old estate. It's got a great decapitation, which for 1963 you didn't always see.
Yeah.
Even in Roger Corman movies.
It's one of those actually very good public domain horror movies that always ends up on double features with Night of the Living Dead, which is the best public domain horror movie.
Yeah. Well, let's not have the Carnival of Souls Night of the Living Dead.
Okay. I thought you were going to go with like silent film like Nosferatu, but I forgot Carnival of Souls was. Okay,
we'll do a bonus episode. We'll rank the top 10 public domain horror films.
That's
of all
a good
time.
idea, actually. I like that.
In the meantime, though, we can talk about the pretender to the Alfred Hitchcock throne, William Castle's Straight Jacket. Now, this is a very clear Psycho ripoff.
Yes.
William Castle popped up in all his trailers the way Hitchcock would. But William Castle, while Hitchcock is a great master of the art form, William Castle is a great master of marketing.
He's like William Castle isn't actually a Southern redneck, but he's like the Southern redneck equivalent to Hitchcock's proper British.
Yeah,
like
He is. Oh, he's so. There's something so quintessentially American about William Castle.
And there's something so quintessentially American or English about Alfred Hitchcock.
Absolutely. In that way. If you ever saw Matinee, that is John Goodman's character is William Castle, or it's a takeoff of William Castle. Straight Jacket is a Joan Crawford movie where she comes back from a mental institution, and maybe this is a classic trope of slashers and proto-slashers where she's just a little off and people just don't know how to deal with her yet, but we got to give her some space. But then also there's murderers happening, and is it her? And
which would be reused in Psycho 2 to very good effect. But Psycho 2 is, I guess, post Proto-Slashers. I don't know what you count that. The Straight Jacket also belongs in a line of movies called Hagsploitation, which will be its own episode.
When we were discussing the list of what would be considered proto-slasher, I thought of a bunch of Hagsploitation. And that was like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane feels like very much a post-Psycho movie.
So then, same way I was trying not to put giallo movies on here, I was trying not to put Hagsploitation movies on here. I'm doing my best. Sometimes there's
Fear not, fans of Who Slew Aunt Rue, your day is coming. Speaking of quintessential British, what is the monster of London City? And is London City different than London?
No, it's just I've not seen it, but it is a Jack the Ripper movie.
Okay,
and it's one of the more violent ones for its time. I would actually wanted to watch it for this, but I was not able to find a copy.
We get into Color Me Blood Red, another classic Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. This one with the tortured artist trope. A lot of the time, slasher killers are artists who
it's going to keep coming up.
Their murders are part of their work and what makes their geniuses, but they're tortured geniuses. And obviously, as we all know, in 2019, if someone is an artistic genius, you just got to let them get away with whatever they get away. Whatever horrible things they want to do.
Yeah, I guess Color Me Blood Red is kind of there's a Me Too component to it. The thing about Color Me Blood Red that makes it's interesting because it's maybe it might be his most serious.
Yeah, it is.
Splatter movie.
It doesn't have two mannequin heads talking for 5 minutes at the beginning.
It's not particularly campy, and the lead performance is kind of good.
Yeah. But it's still trash.
It's still trash, and they still literalize the artist standpoint that he can only get the color of red he wants by killing people and using their blood.
See, that is the Herschel Gordon Lewis.
Yeah,
part, and so you couldn't have obfuscated it a little bit and made it metaphorical.
No, there's no metaphor this time.
If you want to see the highbrow art house Japanese New Wave version of Color Me Blood Red, Blind Beast.
Yes. Yes, which I don't even know what you would characterize that genre.
Well, one day we'll figure out what Blind Beast fits into, because you'll want to talk about that for sure.
Yeah.
We had the Monster of London City. Now we're at the Monster of Venice. Is this another serial killer movie?
This is really this is a proto-giallo. And I did more of a write-up on this on the website. I'll link to that. But it's basically early giallo meets early slasher meets mad scientist film meets Phantom of the Opera. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have a lot to it beyond that.
The Ghastly ones from 1968. That's another Herschel Gordon Lewis, right?
No, that is Herschel Gordon Lewis's this is Andy Milligan.
Oh,
Andy Milligan is like Herschel Gordon Lewis, but more so. I don't know how to really describe Andy Milligan other than he tries his best. Mm-hmm. And I can understand why he has a following, because his movies have a very specific flavor to them. And The Ghastly Ones is one of the more watchable movies in his thing. I think that the most watchable one is Bloodthirsty Butchers, which I think that is also on this list, which is kind of slasher variant, proto-slasher variant of the Demon Barber of Fleet Street.
Andy Milligan is one of those dark hallways I have yet to go down, but one day I know I will.
You need to have some time and some patience.
Yeah, there's an Andy Milligan contingent on Letterboxd that I follow, and I know it's something. It's like one of a kind. I just don't know if I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
Twisted Nerve from 1968. That's a British thriller.
Yeah, and it's a particularly good one. I think a lot of people, I believe its theme is what is whistled in Kill Bill.
That's correct, yeah. Or at least that is from the movie.
Yeah. And actually, I think people should just look at that one. I was thinking about covering that, but I had seen it pretty recently and I kind of wanted to watch new things. So I skipped it.
Night After Night After Night. What a good title.
This is one I could not find a copy of. I know that it exists. I know that it's out. But it might only be in Britain. This is one of those earlier, not violent, but not super violent movies that ended up on the Video Nasties list, I believe. I don't think it was on the official prosecuted list, but it was on the larger list.
Video Nasties, another episode for a later
its
date.
Own thing.
Yeah. Which we'll probably end up talking about movies you talk about in other episodes on that one, but that deserves its own discussion. Night of Bloody Horror is a title I've seen a lot, but I know nothing about this film from 1969.
This is another one, unfortunately, I don't know anything about this one either.
But its reputation suggests Proto-Slasher.
Yes. All the descriptions of it I picked up on.
Nightmare in Wax from 1969
is basically House of Wax updated.
Oh, that's fun. Now, another title that I'm very familiar with, but I've never seen, The House That Screamed.
The House That Screamed is almost not includable on this list, but it has so many moments that are very slasher-esque. It's a Spanish horror movie about a girls' school that has a killer, but it's also really about the girls themselves. And there's this brilliant scene where all the girls, there's a delivery boy that they take turns having sex with, and it is a certain girl's turn, and the other girls are trying to keep the sexually repressed marm busy by doing their sewing classes. And they intercut between the sex scene and the sewing, and they all start sewing faster and faster as the sex is getting faster. And when during the climax, one of the girls pricks her finger.
That's pretty good.
And it's worth it for more than just that scene, but that scene is so good.
Yeah.
That's a great movie. It's also on Blu-ray from Scream Factory. Highly recommend it.
And now we're getting into one of your picks from 1971. You got to talk about this one because this movie is. I don't know where to start with this movie. The Headless Eyes from 1971.
Okay.
He called himself a collector. But what he collected meant someone had to die. A maniac is loose. Obsessed by an uncontrollable urge to kill. He's watching you. But when you see him, it will already be too late. Run and he will catch you. Hide and he will find you. When you give him the eye,
He was very pretty.
you're already dead.
I picked.
Why did you choose this film?
I didn't mean to choose just trash. Like you chose,
But you sure
chose
did.
3 great movies, and I chose 3 just piles of garbage. And two of them, including this one, I chose because I have fond teenagehood memories of finding the videos back in those days when you're a teenager and you just want the next Lucio Fulci zombie.
Yeah.
And so you rent anything that is unrated.
Sure.
Or has a gory box. And sometimes you end up with something like Headless Eyes, which has this wonderful box from Wizard Video that is eye-catching cover of an eyeball that appears to be crawling away from the woman's face. And then there's a Too Gory for the Silver Screen logo in the corner, which was something that Wizard did on a couple of their videos, which is a total lie in this case because this did play on the silver screen and predates VHS tapes.
Right.
And then they reused the same graphic in another one of their movies.
Oh, really?
Actually, technically Full Moon did. It was called The Killer Eye, but Full Moon and Wizard are the same company these days. And so I picked this up because of that. And the back box synopsis reads, and it's lies.
So this is, you picked up the box.
And this is what the box
in
says.
the video store. This is what you read.
For fans who howled at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Dawn of the Dead, more gruesome gore is in store when blood fills the screen for Headless Eyes. an artist turned housebreaker. And I want to pause there because I've never heard the term housebreaker used in reference with someone who breaks into houses.
It's you would think like that'd be a show on HGTV.
Or someone who teaches dogs to go out of bathroom outside.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Anyway, is this artist turned housebreaker is discovered by his victim. In their struggle, she gouges out his eye with a spoon. With his eye hanging down his cheek by a nerve and driven insane by the pain and horror, the artist seeks vengeance on the world and the sex, and I think by sex they mean gender,
right?
That maimed him. He stalks beautiful women through the streets of New York, leaving a gory trail of hideously mutilated bodies that make headlines and baffle the police. So he's not stalking women in this movie.
No. This is a proto-slasher in that there is a certain type of like once you get into the proper slasher era, there's not a lot of films like this, but I think again once you get into like it's fitting that you read from the back of the video box, because this reminds me of a lot of direct-to-video like trauma movies.
Yes.
Where it's like what is happening and why, like the pacing is baffling, and it's mostly like a character wandering from scene to scene, and then like they encounter someone who provokes them to kill them. Except it came out in 1971 instead of 1993.
Everything about it says it must have come out in 1986 at a minminimum.
Yeah.
And then you realize it predates Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Except that it does kind of feel like like New York Underground film of the 70s. Like it kind of feels like Paul Morrissey or something.
Yes, and that's its closest cousin.
Maybe just because that's where it takes place, and just because like that was just such a weird scuzzy era of New York City that it's just sort of unmistakable.
But there's all these good to interesting movies. You can compare it to Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
You can compare it to Maniac again. Mm-hmm. You can compare it to Combat Shock. You can compare it to Basket Case.
Yeah.
It came out well before any of those movies. It's like this accidental New York goth underground weird monster vision that feels like a ripoff of the movies that followed it. And I doubt any of those filmmakers saw it. Maybe Martin Scorsese. Yeah, he watched weird stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe
like Lustig.
Lustig
would
probably
have seen
saw
it.
You're right. Lustig
before
would have
making Maniac. But there is something about the fact that this was made in 1971 that, and this could just be me. This could just be like my weird thing as far as like just a weird hang up I have. But because of where New Hollywood was, and because there was just a lot of interesting low budget art house films being made, it is impossible for me. Not impossible, but it's very difficult for me to really actually distinguish the difference between cheap trash and like fascinating artistic choices. Like I've seen trash and I've seen Flesh or I've seen Heat and Trash, the two Paul Morrissey movies. And this has that feeling sometimes where you're just like stranded in a scene where his sister comes by to visit him and he just has this like 3-minute monologue as the camera pushes into his face. And you're like, oh, this isn't I thought this whole thing was just a goof, but you're like actually supposed to care about this guy? Like,
he gives like this out of body speech about his artistic intent. And his sister is really concerned with there's this thing about the starving artist, but then there's also this concept that he has a lot to fall back on. He has this sister that's trying to help him and stuff, and that he's kind of, but it's never explored, this idea that he's sort of putting himself in this situation as to like make himself be a struggling artist for some reason. It's there's also the implication that after he starts killing people and stealing eyeballs, that is inspiring his art. But they don't really.
His obsession mostly seems to be a little glass jar that has an eyeball in it that he runs under tap water.
Yes.
Hi, this is Gabe jumping in for just a second to let everybody know there's a bit of an audio distortion issue after this point in the podcast. It pops up for a couple minutes, and then it will go away for a while, and then it will pop up again for a couple minutes. It kind of sounds like a CD skipping. Couldn't get rid of it. I figured this is the prototype podcast, so we can all live with it because the content's good. I apologize and hope it won't happen again.
Oh, it's such a gross moment. That's like the moment that feels like a Paul Morrissey thing where you're just like, oh, why am I watching this? This is so grody.
Well, and he has like ice cubes full of or ice trays full of
eyeballs
and stuff. And we don't actually see him do too many murders. In fact, there's one murder that almost seems like a flashback, and then turns out it isn't a flashback, that it's something that like he realized he left a loose end and runs upstairs. It's one of those movies that is clearly filmed way out of order, like on weekends.
Yeah. That's an interesting point,
but isn't going for that same they're on drugs aesthetic that other new Hollywood is going for.
No, but then there's another aspect to it, which is an aspect of a lot of exploitation films of this era, which is the music. I feel like through the 60s, the music is so strange.
Yeah.
And like all through the 70s, you see these like super low budget horror movies that feel like they just got people together to like he knows a guy who's a quote unquote musician, and that means he just has a lot of weird percussive instruments.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, director, producer, screenwriter, you guys over here just start banging on these different things. I'm going to play this keyboard here. I'm going to play this organ. And they do that for like 15 minutes, and then they go, okay, that's the score. We'll figure it out later. So there's just this weird, aimless, percussive, like just very chaotic music that's happening under the whole thing. That doesn't seem to be necessarily reacting to what's happening on screen.
Like there's like a couple times where it's a chase, maybe once where it's a chase, and the percussion kind of makes sense in that concept, but they reuse the same 2 or 3 pieces over and over and over and over again.
And it's one of those things that it takes a movie that if it was made in the 90s, if it was a direct-to-video trauma team kind of pickup that some kids made with a camcorder, like, it would just be like, all right, whatever. But, like, it just has this otherworldly strangeness to it because of that music and because of because I just guess early 1970s New York is just such a fascinating location.
Yeah. And a lot of it, there are a couple scenes where the dialogue is genuinely funny, like on purpose. Yeah, but it is one of those movies, as you were saying before, you can't separate the trash from the value. You can't separate what's supposed to be funny from what isn't supposed to be funny, but there are a couple examples, like he runs into there's like one long sequence where he runs into a prostitute on the street, and he has just killed someone, and he's looking troubled, and so she comes up to him and kindly says, "Are you in trouble?" And he goes, no, I got away. And it's such like a weird, like he misunderstands that she's saying, and like he tells her, and then she invites him upstairs, which is a weird thing that has happened in the next movie we're going to talk about, where prostitutes are inviting these murderers to hang out with them, and I don't know why.
Prostitutes got a lot of time on their hands.
Yeah, it seems in the 70s you only had to do a couple tricks, and that was your day.
Yeah. I mean, and then I think in 2019, sex workers just spend a lot of time just sort of hanging out.
Yeah, I mean, and she's not inviting him upstairs for sex either. She's inviting him upstairs because she's genuinely concerned about his well-being.
Right.
Because he looks troubled the entire movie. He's actually less of a Norman Bates and more of an Ed Gein. Like, he is this troubled creature that is also a cold-blooded murderer, but can, like, flip on a dime. He's a little bit of a proto-Leatherface, except for that he has these long soliloquies about stuff. But he has that fragility.
Well, he has that energy that you'll run into sometimes when you're just like, there are people. I think this is especially true in like major cities where people can live sort of meager existences in small apartments or whatever, and like have undiagnosed, unchecked, sort of unmedicated mental illnesses and stuff. Like, you'll just run into people who give off really strange energy, who are just entirely in their own little world, and you'll just go like, oh wow, okay. And like, he's very believable, that guy. Like, he's the weirdo who lives above you, in the apartment above you or whatever.
Right. Later on in that scene, there's another genuinely funny line where he doesn't understand. She's trying to say she's a prostitute and he's not getting it. And she finally says, "I'm a hooker. Couldn't you tell?" And then clicks her tongue and says, "No wonder I wasn't getting any work today." Which is a good line.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
And I was waiting for more lines like that later, because I hadn't watched this in years.
Like a more knowing sense of comedic. But like, not really. It's not really there.
There's another one.
Not that much wit.
No, there's another moment where I'm not sure if it's supposed to be funny, where they're interviewing people on the street about one of his murders, and I'm pretty sure they're just interviewing people on the street.
That scene is
I don't think those are actors.
Fascinating, because it's this fake newscast where it's like, another body found without the eyeball, and like there's all these people gathered around who are just staring dead at the camera and just sort of like very clearly not actors because there's just too many of them for this budget of movie. Like, no way you paid 15 people to hang out in front of this building.
But then there's this great moment where you realize in that sea of faces, he's just standing there wearing glasses to disguise himself. And he has the most awkward, I'm not the killer look on his face. And again, I think that's supposed to be funny. I'm not positive, but it was a good, it was a good way to go.
But I think a lot of these kinds of movies, what ultimately brings it down is that it's just like they don't know how to. There's no arc to it. It's just sort of like the thing that I find interesting about it is the thing that makes it impossible to end well, which is just like I have no idea where this is going. This is just going on and on. The structure's so strange.
But it also, I seriously doubt there was a completed script.
Yeah,
they had scripted sequences.
It feels like they ran out of money and they were like, yeah, that's fine. We could.
There's one really great scene where a woman is interested in his art. And he's so, and it's almost something I almost relate to as someone who does art, is he's so thrown off by someone being interested in his art that there's like this, not sure if it's real or a dream sequence where he's just running down the street, repeating this, what she said about liking his work over and over. And he's literally rolling his body down buildings throughout New York. Like, not in glee though, like in terror, like, oh my God, someone's interested in my work. Panic. Yeah. Which that repeated dialogue thing, by the way, I'm going to try to find it. The movie begins with, as I described from the box, his getting his eye spooned out. And they repeat the same, my eye. It's like on a loop throughout that entire sequence. I'm going to try to find a sound cue of that.
Have you ever had a toy as a child that you press a button and it would say one of 3 catchphrases and you would press that button so much that just like every tiny intonation and weird background noise and everything of that sound clip is like burned into your brain? Like that is what the feeling of watching the beginning of this movie is, because it repeats so, like, and it just goes on so long for a credit sequence. They could have cut like a minute out of it.
And the first time I saw it, I remember thinking I had a broken VHS tape.
Yeah.
Hi, Gabe again, just letting you know that was less than 1/4 of how long that scene goes on and repeats. So just use your imagination to fill in the other 2 minutes.
And I actually went out of my way to get the Blu-ray of this to give it its full chance.
Oh, sure. Well, you just gotta.
And yeah, it's still there. It does look a little better on Blu-ray. I will say it looks a little more like a real movie, quote unquote, but it doesn't make a huge difference as far as that goes. But I mean, yeah, it's almost like he's having crippling imposter syndrome during the scene I was just mentioning where he's rolling on the, I can't be a good artist. There's something, and then there's another scene at the end. The climax is pretty good, where he chases a woman into a meat locker.
Yeah.
And it's actually well shot and actually sort of suspenseful.
Yeah.
But then he ends up trapping himself.
Oh, that's the end? I did not get that from that ending.
He accidentally traps himself
and
dies.
Okay.
And is unable to, again, so we have a theme here. He's unable to complete his art because oh my God, we have a fire and ice thing, Patrick. I didn't even put that together.
Oh, man.
Hangover Square, he is unable to complete his art in fire. And this one, he freezes to death, unable to complete his art.
Krieger versus Eyeless. Whoever wins, we lose.
Yeah. Basically. Man, that could
Then
be.
Krieger died by fire. The guy from Headless Eyes died by ice. Can we use that somehow?
What is that company that puts out all those comics of fan wing?
Oh yeah, like
versus
IDW or like Dark Horse or something.
Somebody, I can't remember who does it, but they should probably get on Headless Eyes versus Hangover Square.
I'm probably on some 90s shit, thinking Dark Horse still does that.
Yeah, they might not actually.
Wasn't that the origin of Alien versus Predator was just like that Dark Horse comic?
Dark Horse Comics owned them both. Same with Terminator versus RoboCop.
At any rate, this movie is bad.
It's bad, but
I kind of like
it's that enjoyable. Oh, and we should also mention that it was directed by Kent Bateman, who only directed one other movie that was not a horror movie. And he is most famous for being the father of Patrick Bateman.
Jason Bateman.
Jason Bateman. Patrick Bateman.
If he was the father of Patrick Bateman, that'd be very
Patrick Bateman is not a
The
real
timeline
person.
checks out. He could be the father of Patrick Bateman.
No. He directed a lot of pornography, not under his real name. And then he directed a thing called Land of No Return, which is a TV animal trainer crash lands his plane in the Utah desert with his animals. And it's a survival action adventure movie.
Oh, that sounds good.
I don't know if the animals are on his side. I haven't
Sounds
seen
good.
it. But it's got William Shatner and Mel Torme in it.
Oh, it's got William Shatner then.
And Mel Torme.
That at some point he is to like face a bear or something.
But his if you're into it, his porno name, directing name is Henry Packard with a CH.
Okay.
But yeah, he appears to have put most of his effort into producing movies like Teen Wolf 2 and Breaking the Rules, both starring Jason Bateman.
There you go.
So
Nepotism wins
So
again.
if you're really into Arrested Development, in part, Headless Eyes played a very small part in that, but it plays a part in it.
That's the only thing Headless Eyes is missing is when the girl is like, "You're such a great artist." You just hear Ron Howard go, "He wasn't."
He wasn't. Yeah. That's good. That's good.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, do the meme where, do a thing where Buster loses his hand with the guy losing his eye. We can work this out. This can work. Now the next one we have listed also from 1971 is not Blood and Black Lace, it is Blood and Lace.
Which is this very strange movie that I would really suggest people watch. It's weirdly perverted. It's mistakenly called the most violent PG rated movie of all time. It's technically rated GP, which predates PG, but it's basically the same rating. It's perverted and weird and has a really violent hammer kill, which is sort of illustrated on the poster.
No, pretty good.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Worse than Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Bloodthirst from 1971.
I don't really know much about that one.
We also have Bay of Blood from 1971.
We all
know that one.
Well, we should put some links to our Mario Bava podcast we did with Jim.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we talk about that at length.
Bay of Blood, very influential in that, just whole sequences ripped off from it. And also that lake setting, I think, was probably influential on the Friday 13th. The way
they eventually admitted it. Took them years, but they eventually admitted that they were basically...
That's funny.
Yeah.
Die screaming, Marianne. That's like the most intense thing you just say to your friend Marianne.
This is a Pete Walker movie. Pete Walker is actually a pretty important figure in Proto-Slashers, I think.
Okay.
He has a very specific brand of well-made, British killer movies.
Oh,
and almost
House
all
of
them,
Whipcord.
Almost all of them fall under the Proto-Slasher category. Most of them, the majority of them, I would call Proto-Slashers. And I don't think he ever made anything late enough that would be really called a slasher.
I feel like I've seen Schizo's
very slasher-like. Frightmare is probably the one that's the easiest of his to see. Killer Old Lady.
I think wasn't Schizo part of a double feature, Scream Factory double feature, maybe?
That was Schizoid.
Schizoid. Okay, never mind. We also have from 1971 Fright.
Fright is one that I don't remember a lot about.
This is another British.
It's also British, and it has, as again, the poster gives away its best aspect, which is a kill via glass, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I don't. And it's babysitter. The babysitter aspect would become a slasher thing thanks to both. I would say When a Stranger Calls and Halloween.
Yeah, and there is a good I don't know if this was an influence because the movie was not particularly well seen, but there's a good Good is Strong. There is a intermittently effective William Castle movie. God, what is that movie called? I Know You're Alone. It's anyway, two girls are having a sleepover and they're all alone in the house and they prank call someone who just killed someone and say, I seen what you done. Is that what it's called? I saw what you did or something like that?
I think yeah.
Okay. That has a very good proto-slasher sort of sequence at the end where he discovers where they live and tracks them down and starts chasing them. Most of that movie is real bad. But at any rate, babysitters. Wait, they're not even babysitting. What the hell am I saying? Hands of the Ripper, 1971.
Okay, I wrote a little bit more on this one. It's a Hammer movie. It's at a point when Hammer is trying to reinvent themselves for hippies. and counterculture youth, and try not to be the stuffy. But
Dracula 1972.
yeah, but they're still doing period pieces. So this is a particularly violent period piece, and some of the kill. It's a woman I mentioned before. It's a woman who is the child of Jack the Ripper, the secret child of Jack the Ripper.
Right.
And it's basically a Jekyll and Hyde idea where something will happen, and Hangover Square is also sort of a Jekyll and Hyde.
I guess so, yeah.
That comes up a lot.
Speaking of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah. Which
1971, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. This is a slasher movie?
This is actually.
Or Proto-Slashers?
Yeah, and these are both Hammer movies.
Okay.
This is both Hammer trying, and so I actually wanted to talk about both those movies together in a different article on here. But it has some of the best gothic slasher kills you'll see.
Huh. And then we have Invasion of the Blood Farmers. Is this a sci-fi film?
No, this is a redneck exploitation. Kind of thing. It's very low budget. It also just got a Blu-ray release. I wish I should have written down who the studio is. I think it's also Severin. Just put that out. I have not seen what it looks like. I imagine they did a good job. It's really it's as much a proto-slasher as a lot of those Herschel Gordon Lewis movies are.
Dear Dead Delilah from 1972.
This is one I was going to watch and could not find a copy of, unfortunately. But I hear it's good.
Baron Blood is a Mario Bava joint, so it looks incredible.
And it is it has that whole gothic. It's very similar. He ripped off some shots from House of Wax Wholesale. It's Bava going through the motions, and it's still really well made. Is what it comes down to. But it's one of his slower movies. It's got some good set pieces, though.
What is Sweet Kill from 1972?
Well, Sweet Kill is actually the next movie that I picked because I'm a crazy person.
That's right. Okay, this one I did not get a chance to watch.
Patrick didn't get to see this one.
They wanted love. He gave them terror and death. Sweet Kill. What were the mysterious urges that drove this man to answer the longing for warm flesh with a brutal thrust of cold steel? The New York Daily Mirror says, Sweet Kill is a horrifying suspense hit. If Sweet Kill doesn't make you scream, nothing will. Sweet Kill, starring Tab Hunter, in a new kind of role that moves him into the front rank of screen artists. Sweet Kill, rated R. Not recommended for the weak of heart.
Sweet Kill is one I picked. Now here's how my brain works. I picked this one because it was on the Shout Factory Shout TV website. And I said, I heard this is a proto-slasher. I will watch this. I found the Embassy Suites, Embassy Home Entertainment video box, and I read that. So I'm going to read that like I did the last one.
Please do.
Ted Hunter, the Tab Hunter, stars as Eddie Collins, a physical education teacher. There's no indication of this in the movie. I think there's maybe like half a scene where, whose bizarre sexual obsession with beautiful women leads to savage destruction. While working out on the beach one afternoon, he helps two lovely girls, Sherry and Lauren, who are having trouble with their car. Inviting Sherry home for a drink, he tries to make love to her, but is impotent. Thinking Eddie's withdrawal is a rejection of her, Sherry strikes out at him. Eddie strikes back, and his revenge is the beginning of a nightmare of sexual frustration, erotic guilt, and death.
Oh, that too.
Yes.
It must be a proto-slasher.
So, this implies that he purposely kills her. He actually shoves her aside, and she knocks her head on the desk.
Classic Bad Ronald situation.
Yeah, and he finds himself attracted to her. And there is an indication that they might have filmed actual necrophilia, or meant to, but it's really mostly implied that he can only get it up if women are dead.
Huh. Oh, boy.
But this is one where the backstory behind the movie itself is okay. Tab Hunter's actually really good, and in part because he's miserable. Tab Hunter is what was he? Christine's in the room. Christine, what year would Tab Hunter have been a star? In the 60s? 50s. 50s heartthrob.
Beach movie.
Yeah.
Sort of a heartthrob.
Who is, and this is where it starts to get meta, been a closet gay man for most of his life. Until he got quite a bit older, and then he started to be in John Waters movies, actually, and then he became happy again. But at this point in his career, he's miserable, making low-budget Roger Corman productions, and his misery shows through this movie. So he's actually pretty good at it.
Okay, so there is a little Hangover Square fictional.
Indeed, and this is again an accident. I didn't mean for any, but I'm watching Hangover Square, and I'm like, oh my god, this has all this weird shit in common with a movie I watch. Anyway, it's actually directed by Curtis Hanson. Who is an Oscar winner for L.A. Confidential, and he did Wonder Boys, which I actually like. He is passed on. He died recently.
Oh, okay.
This is him being handed a movie by Roger Corman, and I'm trying to remember. Corman said that he wanted Hanson to make either a motorcycle gang movie, a women in prison movie, or a sexy nurse movie. And Hanson didn't really want to do any of those, but he was able to get. Make up a quote fourth category, a modern psycho ripoff. And Corman liked that idea. And so Curtis Hanson made this movie with some really gorgeous scenes, like really evocative, well-shot sequences. And then there are all these really terribly shot sequences and really, really gratuitous breast shots. Well, you learn later that he was told by Corman he had breast shots.
Sure.
So they are like it's almost to a degree where like the lighting's different all of a sudden, and there's boobs, and there's like this weird flashback to because it's supposed to be a psycho ripoff. There's this weird flashbacks to this character Eddie's childhood, his mom, and it's got that kind of Marnie thing where mom's I guess supposed to be a prostitute. I don't know exactly what the idea is. So there's a really long sequence at the beginning of the movie where it's just mom walking around naked and taking a bath, and it feels like you're watching a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. So it has that kind of charm of being like a lot of Roger Corman movies from the period where you'll have it's future great filmmaker cutting his teeth, and then sort of awkward transition of the shit that Roger Corman's making him do.
Yeah.
That's sort of charming. But the real charm is the meta idea of this movie about an actor who at the time is still in the closet for the most part, who is past his prime, and who is in a movie where he is killing women because he can't have sex with them. And the idea that a gay man is being a gay actor being forced to pretend to have sex with women and having straight sex. But then it gets weirder when you remember that Tab Hunter was for very many years in a relationship with Anthony Perkins, who portrayed Norman Bates. So there's this whole extra level of a guy portraying his ex's most famous character, but the sad, cheap version of it. So it's really one of those movies that works better as a idea than it does as a movie. And I went into it not knowing any of this stuff. If you watch
as an object, rather than a work.
If you watch it as a movie, it's really boring. And it's to the point where there'll be long discussions where people will just have an entire conversation. There won't be any cutting away, and they'll rediscuss everything they discussed in the previous conversation again. And there's like a scene of him stalking a woman because he realizes she's seen something. It takes place entirely in real time. Basically, he like crawls out a window, follows her down the road. There's no suspense. He's just walking and then hanging out. And there's like a scene where he stops to have a glass of milk. And it's the entirety of going to the fridge, pouring milk, drinking the milk.
That is
taking a breath.
That's Jim's favorite scene from Todd Haynes' movie Safe.
Yes.
Is the scene where Julianne Moore drinks a glass of milk. I don't remember Safe very well, but I do remember Jim raving about and you watch her drink the whole glass of milk. So clearly very influential.
Maybe we should tell Jim about it.
We should tell Jim about Sweet Kill.
It's more like the scenes in not in Todd Haynes movies. Who's the one who did
Gus Van Sant?
It does feel a little bit like Budget Gus Van Sant. Actually, that's a better one than I was going to make. So I'm going to leave it at Gus Van Sant.
Yeah, something about Jerry or something.
Yeah, and it's just a really obtuse, weird movie that works as a meta text better than as a movie.
Corman in the 70s, not Corman in the 60s.
No, and it's really the
This is
value
a
of
New
Corman in the
World-
70s.
This is New World Pictures, right?
Yes. And the value of Corman in the 70s is the idea of, oh, that guy was going to be famous someday. And I should mention that there is a very brief cameo from Angus Scrim. Rory Guy is his real name, who is the tall man in the Phantasm movies. And I only mentioned that so people remember as we go into another movie here.
Sounds good. I do want to say, at this point, we're in 1972. We are 6 years before the release of Halloween. You kind of feel the genre beginning to construct itself.
Yes.
When you were talking about films in the 40s, we were talking about very disparate movies that had maybe some similar elements or that you could tie into later works. This, you start to feel they still feel very disparate and different. All right, you're all set?
It's all ready?
Yeah, finished.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Close the door, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
That was a plumber.
That was the guy fixing Patrick's bathroom, and I'm going to leave that in.
Yeah, it should be. It should be. This is the first episode. This is a proto episode.
Yeah. It has to have some charm.
So I feel like these films are starting to, like, if there's a bullseye and the center target is like the slasher genre, you see all the post-Halloween slashers pretty much all hit right around the same point. And this is, you start to see the shots getting a little bit closer to each other. There's a little bit more grouping. You start to feel like, okay, there's some psycho riffs. There's going to be, or the Gothic Curse thing, the Mario Bava thing, or there's going to be this sort of giallo influence, like kind of thriller. You start to feel that the same things keep popping up again and again.
And again, I should again say I didn't realize how many things these we're going to have in common, and that's part of the fun of. I'm hoping going to be the fun with the whole of this podcast is realizing all these things in common that I didn't realize they had in common. Excuse me.
So after Sweet Kill 1972, we get into 1972's Pigs, or Daddy's Deadly Darling, which I guess is the British title.
Yeah, and it's another, if I'm remembering it correctly, I might have it confused with another movie. It's another sort of exploitation thing. But
Is this a weird art house kind of a thing as well? Or
it might be, maybe I'm thinking of the wrong movie. This is another one that also came out on Blu-ray recently.
Right.
So I might try to find that, and maybe I'll write up a thing about it.
We have 1972's Tower of Evil. Is this a Gothic?
This is a Gothic slasher. It's another British one. I'm trying to remember who directed this one. Jim O'Connelly. I do not know anything else Jim O'Connelly did. He did Berserk and the Valley of... Oh, man, he did the Valley of Gwanji, which predated this by quite a bit. No, 69. Okay, not that much. Valley of Gwanji being the one cowboys and dinosaurs fighting each other. So he's got a pretty wide array, but he did not make a lot of movies.
Ray Harryhausen do Valley of Gwanji?
It might have been one of the last ones he worked on.
Pretty good. Now we get into a very strange proto-slasher movie, just mostly by nature of the circumstances surrounding it, which is Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, 1972. This movie is so bizarre. If you watch Hitchcock's later work, you start to feel his style get more and more long in the tooth. This film kind of feels like a film he would make in the 40s. And when I say feels like, I mean like formally, I mean the way he like frames things.
The fact that it takes place in Britain.
The fact that it's sort of a contemporary British thriller about mistaken identity and stuff. But even just like the feel, the look, the acting, it feels like a movie that could have come out 30 years it's prior. Except it's super graphic in a way that he could never be in any previous film he ever made.
It's not necessarily bloody, but
it's scuzzy.
It's scuzzy. It's mean. There's strangulation
like so many
scenes. Rape scenes and strangulation scenes that are just awful.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I watched all his later, like his last however many Universal movies in a row because I had the box set. And this one hits right towards the end in a weird place. And just like you said, it feels like a totally out of moment. It feels like a Hitchcock film.
Yeah.
It does not feel like Hitchcock winding down his legacy.
Like, honestly, it feels like the Lodger Story of London Fog. Like, like especially plot-wise, it's very similar to that silent film. But it is just so nasty. And like, it's it's a fascinating movie because it's like this idea of subtext just like bursting through and becoming text, where it's like there are really nasty, scuzzy, gross sort of sexist, sexual, violent sort of implications to a lot of his work.
Yeah. He is sort of answering critics to a certain extent.
And in that way, I guess that this also kind of is like, this is the first film that he made that was maybe like a contemporary of Brian De Palma. I think this is the same year like Sisters came out or something like that. So like he's sort of in that world. And I can't say it's good.
I think it's good in the same way a lot of shocking movies are good, that it's good in that it does what it meant to do.
Sure.
Which isn't necessarily...
It's effective.
Yeah, it's effective. It's not necessarily it's funny. It is funny when it tries to be the stuff with the detective and his wife. It's very misogynistic all around, though. Not just in all the ways things can be misogynistic, in vaguely misogynistic ways. In the way that the guy interacts with his wife is misogynistic. The way the movie presents the wife is misogynistic. The way the people are killed is misogynistic. It's so misogynistic that it really feels like Hitchcock is doing this on purpose, which... the more we learn about Hitchcock, the more it kind of fits. This would have been post-Marnie, so...
Yeah. The other interesting thing about this is we are now sort of nearing the end of the Proto-Slasher. We have gotten to a film made by one of the originators of the Proto-Slasher, at least as far as, this list goes, with, The Lodger, but also, of course, with Psycho and even, Rope. Like, there's so many of his films. There's so much Hitchcock throughout the whole genre, but it does really make you understand how much Hitchcock had to be metabolized and reinterpreted to actually create the slasher genre. Like, you can't look at Halloween and say, oh, he's just doing Hitchcock. Because, because this is Hitchcock doing a slasher.
Yeah, exactly.
And, they're so different. Like, there's so much that had to be done to make these old films into the new slasher genre.
And it is something that makes this era of movies interesting, this weird 70s B movie, because there's all these 70s horror movies that are considered the canon of 70s horror movies, and they're mostly great movies, but there are all these other movies that might not even be good, let alone great, but are interesting in a way because there was some sort of birthing pains or something going on.
Yeah, it sort of is the way the sexual revolution changed culture. It's sort of just like this, oh fuck, this changed everything. We can do things that we weren't allowed to do now.
Like 80s video era, straight to video is the same idea, but there's a homogeny to the kinds of movies that were, even though even more movies were made straight to video in the 80s, they feel more like, oh, this is of the same era. Whereas there's something about these movies that just is all over the place that makes them interesting. Yeah. Even when they suck.
I just wanted to stop and point out Frenzy. We're not a film we're going to talk about in depth as a film, but like a watershed moment for the slasher, proto-slasher sort of genre. 7 Murders for Scotland Yard sounds like a silent film that he would have made pre-Lodger.
It's actually that's one that I kind of broke the rules. It's technically a giallo, but it's sort of Jack the Ripper through a giallo lens, so it really does feel like a pre-slasher kind of thing.
Oh man, what a good title! The Flesh and Blood Show for 1972. 1972, a banner year for proto-slashers.
The Flesh and Blood Show is another Pete Walker movie, and it fits his other. It's not his most famous one. House of the Whipcord and Frightmare are probably his most famous, but this one, it is maybe one of the better ones. I would have to consult a expert on his movies because I am not that. But I think it's one of the more well-liked ones.
Now, Silent Night, Bloody Night was one that we almost watched for this.
And that's another that is in the public domain, so you can see it everywhere. And it's another movie that doesn't know what it wants to be. It's sometimes this weird dreamy thing, and it's sometimes a very straight line, almost slasher, not even proto-slasher. It has almost nothing to do with Christmas, if anything. I don't know why it has that title.
Sisters from 1972, Brian De Palma movie. This is Brian De Palma. Is this Brian De Palma's first sort of Hitchcock freak out?
Yeah. I mean, he has like elements of it in his weird experimental early stuff.
So if you want to like feel the difference between like Alfred Hitchcock doing this kind of movie and Alfred Hitchcock being metabolized by another filmmaker who grew up watching his movies, but then like taking them in a different direction. Like, yeah, Sisters and Frenzy would be a fascinating double
It would
feature.
actually. Yeah, are those the same year?
Yep.
I don't think I put that together when I was making
there's a
this
ton
list.
of 1972 films.
Yeah, Sisters is actually probably my favorite of that kind of De Palma movie. I guess Carrie might be my favorite, and there is a lot of Hitchcock in Carrie, but Sisters feels like this is a Hitchcock murder movie.
Sure. Home for the Holidays, 1972.
That one is another one I tried to get a hold of and I couldn't find, but I wanted to watch this one because it's a made-for-TV movie.
Oh, interesting.
And I was very curious as to how that worked.
Yeah.
But I unfortunately could not find a copy of it in time.
We have Herschel Gordon Lewis's The Gore Girls,
which is one of his more overtly funny movies, but it's at the same time one of his least funny movies because I think the comedy sucks.
Yeah.
Personally. But it basically he hired a comedian to play the lead role.
Huh.
So, but it's particularly violent and it has the stalking sequences.
And then we have winner of Best Trailer of All Time, 3 on a Meat Hook from 1973.
Which is the movie, one of two movies that people remember as being other Ed Gein inspired pre-Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies.
Again, this is the sort of, a lot of...
Ed Gein comes up a lot.
Yeah.
But it's because serial killers start to come up a lot. And serial killers were becoming a big thing in the 70s. They had existed forever, but you have a lot of the, quote, famous serial killers are from the late 60s and 70s.
The Severed Arm, 1973. Is this an arm that comes to life?
Incredibly boring movie about some guys who get trapped, and I think they're hiking, and they're trapped in a cave.
Oh,
and they draw straws.
Danny Boyle. Yeah, I've seen this.
They draw straws to cut off one of their arms and eat it.
Oh, okay.
But they get immediately rescued. And that's like the first 10 minutes of the movie. That's kind of a cool, like, oh no, and then they're rescued. But then there's like another hour of the guy stalking and taking the arms from the other people. It's incredibly boring.
Okay. Torso of 1973, you could not call incredibly boring.
No, I love Torso, and I don't think it's really a giallo. I think it is working with the realm of giallo, but I think it is surpassing it into something else in a lot of ways.
It's a movie I actually find very boring until like the last 15 minutes.
The last 15 minutes are
so good.
One of the best suspense shots in like any movie ever.
I saw Torso at a film festival, and it was a film festival full of hardened horror fans. And the moment with the key in the newspaper, it like everyone went, "Oh!"
Yeah,
and it's like you've seen this before, but it's just so effective. Scream Bloody Murder from 1973.
That one is the last one I picked. And again, I picked this one because I have fond memories of the video box, which is not a good reason to pick movies, it turns out.
I'd like to have seen the sailor buy you things like this. Well, he wouldn't, would he? Huh? Would he? Would he? Would he? Damn right he wouldn't. All he wanted to do was make you filthy. Touch you and look at you. Well, I'm not damn sorry I cut his throat for him. Oh, didn't I tell you I killed the sailor? Well, I did. I did it just for you. So we can be together, you and me. See what I do for you? I get groceries and clothes and art stuff and kill people. And do you appreciate it? No. N-O.
I kind of found it a fascinating movie to watch, even though it was terrible.
It's another one that feels like it could be a trauma movie.
And the funny thing is the director, producer, and co-writer, Mark B. Ray, Mark with a C, co-wrote The Severed Arm. I thought I didn't know that. But the video box, again, it was an older movie that was trying to be sold as a newer movie. And it was sold on the fact that it was the first movie to be called Gornography.
Yes.
Which implies a lot more violence than actually shows up.
This is like the Headless Eyes. This is a classic sort of, we don't actually have the money for good effects, so we're going to have the murderer lunge at the camera, and then there's going to be a stabbing off screen, and then there's going to be someone who reacts with like blood already on them.
Or stumbles into frame or something like that.
I will say this has some very effective like there's an intensity to it. It's not quite as silly, I feel, as the Headless Eyes.
Feels like they actually got a genuinely disturbed young man to star in it. Again, I'll do the VHS box one more time, which again lies a bunch. Matthew, a demented child, causes his father to be mangled to death beneath the giant treads of a tractor. In the process, his own hand is shredded, and he goes into shock. In reality, in the film, he falls off the tractor and runs over himself somehow, like an idiot. Matthew's hand is replaced with a hook, and he is placed in a mental institution for many years of recovery. There's no indication how long he's in recovery. It feels like it's 2 minutes because this movie has no concept of time passage, and things that should take an entire movie to happen take a minute, and things that should take off-screen time to happen take solid 5 minutes to happen. He returns home at the age of 19. There's no way this actor is 19. He's at least 36. To discover his mother has already remarried. Enraged at the sight of her new husband, Michael, they misname him Michael on every video box I've seen. They call him Matthew the first 2 times, then Michael. Brutally murders them both. Although Michael, again, manages to escape the farm, he cannot escape the horrible image of his murdered mother. His recurring visions cause him to become confused and frightened, and he slashes his way through them. I don't know who them is. And the unfortunate ones who cause his visions.
This is the LA answer to the Headless Eyes.
The decaying ghost of his murder victims continue to haunt him. Be prepared to scream bloody murder. So all that stuff that happens at the beginning of the movie would be an entire movie in most cases.
Yeah.
He kills his father for no apparent reason. I guess what we're supposed to think is since he was a child, he was sexually attracted to his mother.
Yeah, it's Oedipal, for sure.
So he kills his dad, and then
because he gets really upset when his mom remarries.
He goes off, and you'd think that, like, if this was a Rob Zombie remade this movie, most of the movie would be him at the insane asylum getting better.
Yeah.
So he is in the insane asylum. He comes home. His mother's remarried. He almost immediately kills his mother and his stepfather. And that's just the beginning of the movie. That's where it starts. And so most of the rest of the movie is him escaping consequences. But there's a funny through line in the movie where there's really never consequences. Like, the police are never really looking for him. He, at one point, to impress a woman he's just met, he just walks into a mansion. He tells her that it's his mansion. There is something effective about this movie, his childlike approach to things, that the way to impress a woman is to tell her you drive a fancy car and you live in a mansion. And so he just walks into the first mansion he sees, kills the servant lady, and kills the old woman who owns the mansion, and then just squats. And there's never any consequences for this.
No, well, the doctor shows up eventually.
The doctor, who's also Angus Scrum.
Oh, I didn't make that connection.
Yeah, that was a weird thing that happened. Shows up, and he just sort of kills him, and nobody comes looking for the doctor. And no one comes looking for the woman he's kidnapped. And so, there's this weird thing where there's never really any suspense. There's a sequence where he's trying to, because he has no money because he's a drifter. He goes on a crime spree throughout town, like robbing stores, stealing goods, and he's not wearing a mask. He just steals a bunch of stuff, and nobody ever comes looking for him.
It's almost like a John Waters kind of a quality
to it.
Where it's
by
just like
accident.
a flexible, cartoonish kind of reality, but horrific things are happening.
And so there's this surreal quality that, like, there's no consequences in this universe. And the only thing haunting him is these honestly sort of creepy visions of his dead mother talking to him with this, like, kind of droopy face, which is easily the best makeup effect in the whole movie.
Unless the actor... there was a moment where you see where his hand was amputated, where he got run over by the tractor. And I was trying to figure out if the actor actually...
It could have been, yeah.
Because it's an actor who's never been in another movie. It's totally possible they find an actual amputee to, like, play the role, and that's why he has such a weird non-actor energy.
Yeah.
But,
and there's inadvertent humor. There's a couple purposeful laughs, but a lot of inadvertent humor in him reacting to these visions of his parents, or his mom and stepmom. Just sort of... there's one point where he has a perfectly good stolen car, and he just abandons it on the side of the road and runs the rest of the way to the suburbs, screaming no. because he's being chased by these visions. But then there's a cut, and the next scene he's fine. He's got this like satchel over his shoulder, and he's just having a good time. But it connects to Headless Eyes in that he runs across a prostitute who is very nice to him, and who he doesn't realize is a prostitute. And there's this proto-slasher thing in that he is if he witnesses any sort of sexual act, he becomes enraged.
Or even like, well, there's the cut when he goes hitchhiking. The couple picks him up, and they're just like they don't even like strip down to go into the water. They just sort of
want him to go swimming with them.
They just sort of like hike up their shorts a little bit or whatever to go into a creek, and he just freaks out. That's one of the most intense moments for me because that's like the most believable thing. Is like, oh shit, this guy's throwing rocks at us. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do right now.
Yeah, something went wrong. I wrote myself a note saying that the movie feels like it was written by an adult who wanted an adult to make it because it has some pathos to it.
Written by a child who wanted an adult?
No. Adult, and then a child ended up directing.
Oh, okay.
A talented child for a child, but it feels like it was made by a child. Just because of the way that characters interact and just like the idea of what sex is in this movie and how it's also this weird thing where they give him this hook hand and he almost never uses it.
I was waiting he finally kills someone with a hook at the end, but he has a hook hand. So you're like, all right, that's the murder weapon, but no, he doesn't really kill people with the hook.
There's the one thing I think was maybe supposed to be funny is there's the scene where he is stealing the house that he's going to squat in, and the owner of the house is a woman with double canes, and she just starts wailing on him with both canes, and she almost gets the better of him. And it's sort of a mirror image of the scene in Martin.
I was about to say
the George Romero movie where Martin is trying to do a home invasion and it's not working out.
He's kind of a pathetic weirdo like Martin.
He is sort of like this crappy
Martin is, and this probably had a comparable budget to Martin, to be fair. Like,
yeah,
like when you see movies like this or Headless Eyes or something, like it makes you better realize like what a fucking like genius Romero was, and like what a miracle Martin is.
Yes,
because like Martin is just such an amazing film, and it probably made with the same equipment and same budget as something like this, which is just trash.
Yeah, and the character is like the whiny toddler version of Martin in a way, but instead of thinking but it has the same motivation where he wants what he thinks is a relation. It has this childlike mentality. He doesn't understand what he actually wants, so he kidnaps this woman who's an artist, and that's our artist through line through 3 of these movies now. This woman who's an artist, and he holds her hostage and tells her she has to paint and enjoy herself. And there's a scene that feels like the most, like, maybe almost brilliant scene in the movie where he has her on a leash and is demanding that she paint. And it feels like this was like somebody meant this to be the point of this movie, was some sort of statement about art, but it doesn't really work out. But it has the pro-slasher thing going on because, again, he's Norman Bates. He's a childlike man who has an affection for his mom. And then there's kill scenes.
Again, we're starting to feel like the proto-slashers organizing and starting to resemble each other more. They still feel like weird anomalies that fell out of, especially movies like this. Like, just fucking, what is this? Who made this? And what was the...
Well, and then...
what money did they think they were going to make off of this?
The guy who actually directed it, I looked into, and one more factoid about this is that he didn't make a lot of movies, but he did direct several episodes of the New Mickey Mouse Club and Kids Incorporated.
All right. Well, there's the kid. The guy who directed this is the child from the Mickey Mouse Club.
Yeah, basically. So yeah, this one is also it's in the private, or it's out. It's a public domain, so you can see it on YouTube if you want to.
I should say real quick, if you search for "Scream Bloody Murder" 1973 on YouTube, you will find a version that says like restored, best available HD or something like that, and it has like 2 minutes of like weird, elaborate like company logos before it, but I think it's just the person who uploaded it to YouTube. I don't think it's an actual like rip of a DVD. And so I wanted to ask you about this because it's a weird movie and it's low budget. So like sometimes in a low budget movie, the sound fucks up and they have to re-record and it's just bad ADR and the dialogue just sounds terrible and weird and doesn't fit the scene. And that happens about every 15, 20 minutes in the version of Scream Bloody Murder that I watched on YouTube.
I watched one on YouTube and it did not have any outstanding. I should find the one I watched.
Because there's like very clear moments where like those are not the actors talking. It's not like a silly voice, but it's just they sound kind of weird and goofy.
Yeah.
But it seems like they're saying the dialogue in the movie, so it'd be a weird prank. Like, I don't know why you would do that, but...
Yeah, it's possible that...
Like, maybe that's what they thought, like, in terms of restoring it. They're like, oh, this dialogue's inaudible. We'll re-record that dialogue.
Oh, that would be fascinating.
That would be... I would want to look up more of that YouTube channel, but that's a whole different ball of wax. Speaking of, Terror in the Wax Museum, 1973.
Yeah, I mean, this is another wax museum. It's the same movie.
Wax museums are good.
Yeah.
There's no bad wax museum movies, I'm going to say. Knowing completely, it must be false.
I mean, I've seen two, so, and they're both good, so.
Mystery of the Wax Museum, House of Wax with Paris Hilton's good.
Yep.
Massage, Parlor Murders.
Yet another one I tried to get a hold of and could not. I've heard that this is on par with the ones we've been talking about.
There's a lot of, like, the difference between slasher movies and this sort of strain of proto-slasher movies, I don't know if this is what Massage Parlor Murders is, I feel like I've heard about it before, is following the killer as the lead.
Yes.
Who is a person who has feelings and emotions and a purpose.
Yeah, and that's definitely a proto-slasher. And it all goes back to Norman Bates, I think. Well, now we know it predates Norman Bates.
Yeah. But then at a certain point in the 70s, we're going to switch, I think, post-Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That is no longer the case. We got Eye for an Eye, 1973, a very good Mobb Deep song, but I don't know anything about the movie.
It's another one I've never been able to find, so I don't know much about that one.
Deranged, 1974, notable for being an early Tom Savini joint.
Yeah, and pretty good movie. It's actually a dark comedy, I would say.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be funny. Yeah, it's depressing. It's more depressing than scary.
It's another Ed Gein.
Yeah, it's the closest to the real Ed Gein of the 3 70s Ed Gein movies. And it's pretty well made, I think.
The corpses certainly look good.
Yeah.
Madhouse, 1974 is... did you put Theater of Blood on here as well?
I didn't, and I hesitated to put Madhouse on here, but so many lists I found counted it. And I wasn't sure if I thought it counted, because I think that Theater of Blood and the Dr. Phibes movies, there's something different to me, but I don't know what it is.
But there was a string of 70s Vincent Price movies where they were a sequence of kills and you followed Vincent Price,
and they
were
creative.
And it was all about creative and like just sort of goofy, dark humor underneath everything. And Madhouse is probably the worst of those.
Yeah, it's easily the worst.
I never saw the Dr. Phibes sequel, actually.
No, Dr. Phibes 2 is actually very good. It's not particularly original, but it has a really good quality to it. I like it quite a bit.
And now we're getting, of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
You've seen it.
The thing that separates the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from most of this list, other than like Psycho, is it was a massive hit.
It was a massive hit, and I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre's big thing was, honestly, it's a production design.
Yeah.
And a lot of these movies don't care about production design.
No. I think there's like 100 amazing things about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that make it the scariest movie ever. But
I think that that's such a big step up. I think that Tobe Hooper never made anything nearly as good as that. And I think that's a very controversial stance. But I think that there's something about that movie that was just sort of special.
It's hard for me to say nearly as good because it's like head and shoulders above like every horror movie, basically. Yeah. But like I do think Tobe Hooper made other great horror movies.
But I do think the production design is a very big deal as far as that goes.
And speaking of 1974, we also have Black Christmas there, the Bob Clark Canadian production. I'm not a fan of this, actually.
It's one I like, but it's more of a half decent like college drama.
Yeah,
it's really like a abortion story wrapped up in this other thing. And it's interesting to note that they never find out who the killer is.
That is true. Like that, I think it's part of its notoriety and sort of reputation, I think, comes from that it's just so vicious. It is genuinely scary in a way that very few actual like slashers and proto-slashers are.
And Bob Clark has this whole dark, like physically dark, like his photography in his movies has a way that it's like skirting the line between art and just not good.
Yeah.
That he made work. And to the point where I actually think even a Christmas Story has this sort of...
Christmas Story has the hazy, soft focus.
It's like creepy. Parts of it have this... Yeah. If you're watching it without the sound or something, there's just something about his photography in his movies that I think goes a long way.
Black Christmas, 1974. Frightmare, 1974.
That's another Pete Walker, and that one's the bloodiest one. The image on the poster of a woman.
I should say, with Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas, you have sort of reoriented the protagonists of the horror movie and reoriented like the audience point of view. Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface is literally just like this unknowable weird person who like the psychology of which you can't begin to understand really. And same with Black Christmas's murderer.
And Black Christmas's murderer, is just someone who doesn't exist in on screen. It's just a bunch of red herrings, which is, I think, very Giallo-esque. I think that he was pulling from that.
Forced Entry from 1975.
Rape movie.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Love Butcher from 1975.
Love Butcher is a fascinatingly weird movie about a mechanic, or I guess he's a groundskeeper, and it's one of those movies like it's like an Andy Milligan movie where it seems to be made by a crazy person.
Yeah.
And it's got a Nutty Professor vibe to it, where the guy like is this grotesque nerdy dude who turns into a handsome dude to get revenge.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, it's not good it's also another one that I think people only saw because it ended up on the Video Nasties list for some reason. It's not particularly nasty.
House of Mortal Sin from 1976.
That is a pretty good trying to remember. House of Mortal Sin, The Confessional, yes. That is also Pete Walker. I think that might have been his last movie, about a killer priest.
Are all Pete Walker's movies gothic period pieces, or are they...
No, they're almost all actual... they take place in the modern era, but they have this sort of out of time quality to them.
Huh. Okay. Jack the Ripper, 1976.
That's a particularly gory Jesus Franco version of Jack the Ripper that really gets into what would become slasher kills because he's focusing on the violence in a way that Jess Franco never really did. Franco never particularly liked the violent. He made softcore porn basically in art films. And garbage. It's interesting almost specifically for the fact that it feels like a slasher movie.
And Town That Dreaded Sundown, 1976 is one I picked out.
Howard W. Turner, 29. Emmylou Cook, 17. Bodies discovered in a wooded area on March 24th. Roy Allen, 17. Peggy Loomis, 15. Both found dead April 14th in Spring Lake Park. Floyd Reed, age 34, murdered in his home on May 3rd. Mrs. Reed shot twice, but survived. This man's identity is unknown. He was believed to be between 30 and 40 years old. He wore a white hood and was known only as the Phantom Killer. World War II had just ended. In Texarkana, Arkansas, boys had come home to their families. Husbands reunited with their wives. It was a happy, peaceful time. Until the Phantom Killer struck. For 4 months, he held an entire city in the icy grip of terror. Now, Charles B. Pierce brings this incredible, shocking, and true story to the screen in The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
It's interesting. I think it's interesting on this list because it is listed so often as a slasher or proto-slasher, but it's actually a procedural.
Yes.
It's actually closer to something like M. Or like it's a very heavy influence on something like Zodiac. Like if David Fincher's Zodiac feels like it.
Huge Zodiac stuff. Yeah.
Especially the sort of like super fact-based, we know the dates, We have a narrator who's making sure that we understand everything we're seeing. It's real. It's from the director of Legend of Boggy Creek. So we have that same sort of blending.
It's actually
of fact
the
and fiction.
exact same narrator as Boggy Creek too. They hired the same. Boggy Creek is sort of the first found footage horror movie in a way, even though it's not quite.
Yeah, it's like a mockumentary almost.
Yeah.
Or a hoax.
Yeah.
Because it was not presented as a mockumentary.
Right.
The Town That Dreaded Sundown is... It's like so about the procedure. It's so about the cops. It's so about all of the red herrings and false turns they go down. But like David Fincher's Zodiac, the scenes where the murders actually happen are so intense and strange and brutal and off-putting. And they're long.
Yeah.
And they're really creepy, and it's got a really iconic mask, which a lot of proto-slashers we've seen up to this point. I haven't seen many masks. But the Town That Dreaded Sundown's mask obviously later shows up in Friday the 13th Part 2.
It's basically a burlap sack with eye holes.
Yeah, it's really creepy. It's got the classic like the killer in Town That Dreaded Sundown has the classic sort of slasher movie villain like physical build where it's just this like sort of big man in boots and jeans.
I didn't think to look it up, but I do believe that guy ended up playing a Jason. I will add right here a thing saying if I'm right or wrong when I go to edit this.
But it's not really a slasher movie. There are 3 sequences that are slasher sequences. They maybe are combined like 15 minutes.
And it's really, and you said procedural, like the slasher, the kill scenes are procedural too.
Sure, though there is a haunting quality about that.
Well, that makes it. I think that there's this whole it almost feels like a Wonderful World of Disney docudrama.
A little bit.
And down to some really awkward comedy. But the fact that then it stops to show pretty realistic versions of real murders that happen.
And not just realistic in terms of graphically violent, but like have the weird detail. Like, okay, so like, you know how it's super scary the first time you see Michael Myers pop out of the closet and pin the guy to the wall, but then there's just the moment after where the music stops and he's just sort of breathing and staring at him and like tilts his head. There's a lot of that where there's this sort of unhinged feeling of we've crossed a moral plane that we can't get back from, in which we see this guy who is exerting this power, these are these power fantasies to him, and he just does bizarre things. Like he has the woman tied up, so he like tapes his knife to her trombone and like torments her with it. It's like it's something that in a slasher movie, like in a Graduation Day or something, like the football knife,
and it would be super graphic, and it would be silly. It would be cut in a way that there would be impact to the stabs. Instead, it's cut in a way where you're watching like an actual killer trying to be creative and fucking it up a little bit.
Right. But also just like amusing himself.
Yeah, amusing it, yeah.
He's not playing to an audience, he's amusing himself. Like in a very specific way. It's really disturbing. The final home invasion scene has some of the most out there sort of expressionist photography where he's like walking through cornfields. You see the moon behind him, and like Zodiac, it has a unfinished sort of
because it was never technically solved.
They never solved this technically. There's like a book that suggests it was probably this one person. Same with the Zodiac, Robert Grayson,
and same with Jack the Ripper. Like there's always there's theories,
but like it's not a slasher movie exactly, but it has a lot of what makes slasher movies great, or at least a lot of great moments in slasher movies. And it also does new things that I've never seen in another slasher movie.
I think that it's I assume that it had influence on Halloween, and I think that its photography might have. I mean, I know that John Carpenter was always planning on doing all his movies in this widescreen photography, but there is a Sergio Leone-esque quality to a lot of the tracking shots, the way they place the camera low. In
the whole thing takes place in Arkansas. And the idea is there's this killer and everyone's panicking because they can't figure out how he kills on a schedule, and they can't figure out how to stop him from killing because it's just too it's just too small a police force with too wide an area. And like the way all of the landscapes and all of the horizons and everything are shot, you really feel like, oh, you are trapped in wide open space. There's no one coming to save you because the nearest road is like way over there, and like you really feel isolated.
And there's a serial killer, like, you know, you have all the 90s serial killer movies where they talk a lot about criminal profiling, and this takes place at a time before criminal profiling. It doesn't take place in 1970s.
This does feel more like Silence of the Lambs than it does like Halloween.
And part of the reason they can't get it together is because there is no criminal profiling back then. It's the very early days.
It has some good production values too, as far as like 40s cars and stuff like
that. Yeah, it looks period. Like,
for a low budget movie, it really does pull off.
I don't know if they just places in Arkansas that haven't been
well,
updated.
I mean, it's very rural, so that helps. But like, I do think the few sort of shots of the more urban areas, you do still feel like you are in that time period. It's very, for a movie from, I don't know, I've not seen Legend of Boggy Creek, but I feel its reputation is it's sort of like weirdly charming and
Boggy Creek is the more likable movie in my view. But this is the real movie.
This is the movie that's like really achieves exactly what it wants to, all the way down to like a weird Wild Bunch sort of slow motion.
And it definitely wants to be. There's also a thing that the director plays one of the main characters.
Oh yeah,
and he plays him like a nice guy who's kind of out of his element, but he plays him like a cowboy. And there's a sense that he wanted to make a cowboy movie.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's something that you don't actually see. I don't think any of these other movies have a cowboy aspect to them. There's not really. I can't think of any slasher movies that have a cowboy.
No, they have a specific sense of place, but not necessarily cowboy. So anyway, Town of the Dread Sundown, 1976. In like all three of the movies I picked are not really slashers, but have elements that are slasher elements that I find outstanding,
and things that definitely informed other movies that became slasher movies. I think this has to have had some effect on Halloween. It has too much in common with it to have not.
Mansion of the Doom, also 1976.
I've not seen that one.
Schizo from 1976.
This is Pete Walker's last.
That's
one.
right.
We talked about this one briefly. Yeah, this one's also pretty good.
Alice, Sweet Alice, I've talked about at great length in my episode on Alice, Sweet Alice on Tracks of the Damned.
And I will be linking to that.
It is I don't know if it's my absolute favorite slasher movie because Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre exist, but I think it is easily the most underrated slasher movie. It has so many weird things going on, but it has the butcher knife, it has the mask. You really have, like, it would be really easy to believe this came out immediately following Halloween instead of right before.
Yep.
And then Drive-In Massacre, the last movie we have on our list, is a weird throwback because that feels like a fucking Herschel Gordon Lewis movie.
Yeah, and it's one where it's one where I think all the slasher elements are almost accidental.
Yeah,
because it feels like it's a post slasher movie until you realize it wasn't actually ripping off anybody in particular. It was just sort of coming to weird conclusions on its own. It's a little better made than I think most Herschel Gordon Lewis, but it's also less entertaining at the same time.
Yeah, there's not as much humor, and the gore. There's like a good decapitation, but for the most part, the kills are few and far between.
They use the drive-in setting. Okay.
Yeah, it's true, and it has one of those fun endings where it's like the killer is in your theater. Like,
yes,
so it's like when you're sitting there, you're sitting at home watching it on a VHS tape, and it's assuming that you're watching it in drive-in, and it's like, attention, stay in your car. The killer is here. Like, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
that is our list of Proto-Slashers.
Yep, and that brings
we went a little longer than we thought we would.
You know, maybe I'll break this into two pieces. Maybe I won't. I'll figure it out.
But I think that was a good overview of Proto-Slashers, and obviously we don't have anything from 1977, but obviously 1978 would bring about Halloween. And,
I wasn't able to find anything from 77. Maybe there's something I missed.
But you could feel, it is interesting going through it chronologically. You do feel everyone's sort of getting to the point, and then it was just John Carpenter was the one who brought everything together perfectly. That was like, okay, now we have the roadmap.
Yep. All right. Well, so that will be it for the first episode. Anybody who listens to this, please find me on Twitter, Gabe M. Powers, I guess on the website itself, which I will link to. I think I'm going to try to put this a couple different places if I can do it.
You're gonna
I haven't actually talked to Jim yet,
sure,
but I assume I'll be able to put it up on.
I think he would want you there
on Now Playing Network, and so I'll have links to everything, and anywhere you can leave a comment. let me know. Did we go too long? If I look at this and it's too long, I'm just going to put it in 2 parts because I know people don't have all the time in the world. I do plan on trying to do a little shorter with some of them. Did I get too specific? Would you rather I cover more movies for less time? Would you rather I cover fewer movies for more time? Do you want better definitions of what genres are?
Yeah, more arguments about definitions.
And I would say suggest some weird subgenres, but oh man, you should see how long the list I made is. But you know what? You might think of one I haven't thought of. Because
what subgenre is squirm?
Squirm is animals run amok.
Okay. There's not a specific bug one.
I mean, that's the problem is for instance, the next one I'm planning will be witch movies. And originally I was just going to do witch movies. But then I realized there is a subgenre of men accidentally marrying witch movies. And then there's a subgenre of teenage girls who discover their witch movies. Or boys, sometimes boys. But
the Sabrinas.
Yeah, the Sabrinas and the Harry Potters, I suppose. I don't want to talk about Harry Potter movies, but I've had to break it apart. And then I was like, oh, I'm being so Euro-American centric. There is a whole world of witch movies. So I'm trying to break these things down. And right now I'm working on a monthly basis, and I'm going to try to get that up to 2 weeks. So I'll have 3 monthly ones. We'll see how that goes. We'll see if people are listening. I'll get some feedback, and then I'll work from there.
Do you have an email address for the podcast?
Right now it is
genregrinder@gmail.com.
And I have a very strong spam filter on that.
Okay, good. Industrial strength.
Yeah.
The only place you can find me is Patrick Ripoll on Letterboxd. So there you go.
Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again. And now there'll be some outro music that I haven't finished recording, but I assume it will be rad.
It's going to be so good. Ooh, I like that guitar.
Yeah.